There's a gentleman on it at the moment, as I can see, so well done, sir. So can I welcome Assembly members, guests, members of public to today's meeting of the Assembly Police and Crime Committee. Main item of business, it's our regular Q&A session with Sir Craig Mackey, Deputy Commissioner. Again, congratulations, Sir Craig, on your knighthood, and Deputy Mayor Sophie Linden. Thank you for coming along this morning. Members of the public may well wish to follow us on Twitter and also join the discussion using hashtag Assembly Police. As ever, can colleagues and members of the public turn their telephones on to silent or off, indeed. Right, item 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Assembly Member Arbour and Assembly Member Devonish, who's substituting for him today, and also Assembly Member Eshalomi and Assembly Member McCartney will be substituting for her.
Thank you both, and Sharon when she comes along. Declaration of interest. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations in item 2 and, as ever, declare any other disclosable pecuniary interests that are not so detailed?
Chair.
Thank you. Item. Oh, sorry. Yes, of course.
I've got a property in the Notting Hill area, so I can't participate in that.
And you'll vacate yourself for that item. Okay. And thank you very much for that. Item 3, minutes. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting with P&C committee on the 31st of January to be signed by me as correct? Thank you. Item 4, summary list of actions. Can I ask the committee to note the completed and ongoing items as in the committee? Item 5, action taken under delegated authority. Can I ask the committee to note the recent action taken by me under delegated authority following consultation, namely to agree the arrangements for our site visit that we visited New Scotland Yard on the 1st of February, and can I ask the committee to note the summary of our site visit as set out in the report. So thank you very much for that. Right, we get to the main substantive item today, which is our question and answer session with the Deputy Mayor and the Deputy Commissioner. We have a busy agenda this afternoon, and we have some items which are very important and are very much of the moment. Before we go into those substantive items, clearly today there was a decision by the Supreme Court on Met appeal in respect of the War Boys case. And it is timely we have you here today, Sir Craig. So initially I'd like you, could you possibly comment on today's ruling?
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. The Metropolitan Police Service fully accepts the decision of the court. We've always accepted that serious mistakes were made in this investigation, and it was only the courage of the victims coming forward, including these two claimants, that enabled the final conviction of War Boys. We know we should have done more in the initial investigation, and today, as we did following his conviction, I unreservedly apologise to the victims that we failed. The MPS appealed, and this was supported by the government, because police forces needed absolute clarity on the boundaries of police responsibility and liability for their investigations. We've always been clear that the appeal to the Supreme Court was not based on any factual differences between us and the victims, but on the appropriate interpretation of European human rights law. The appeal did not seek to recover the compensation and costs awarded to the claimants. Furthermore, the MPS agreed from the outset of the proceedings to pay the legal cost of the complainants, whatever the outcome of the appeal. It was important, we felt, that these issues should be examined through the courts without any financial risk to the complainants. The MPS and other forces will now consider the full implications of the judgment and what it means for future police investigations.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, the judgment will clearly have implications, and clearly this committee will take an interest in that. We'll have one or two questions on this, so thank you for that statement. Joanne, did you want to ask a question?
It was really whether you have any indication of the extent as to what will amount to a significant error, if you like. where do you think the boundary will be drawn? You know, I think that the judgment talked about it being systematic and significant, so it will not apply in 99.9%.
Hopefully, no. And I think the court gave some steering on that, but clearly, as often happens, this will now be an area that courts and lower courts can explore what it means. I think they talk about agrarious failings and that sort of language. So I think it's not 100% clear in terms of if you get to that standard, it's okay. If it gets to that standard, it's a failing. But what is absolutely clear in this case, there were failings there in terms of what happened and what went on. What we're now trying to do with other colleagues across policing is work through the interpretation of what this means, looking at those cases where this Article 3, right to inhumane and degrading treatment, is actually engaged, and try and understand the implications of that judgment.
I mean, obviously this raises issues around supervision at early stages of investigation. That is something that you're going to have to look at. And in the past, we've looked at issues of supervision in many different aspects. And one of the ones was around no criming, for example, in serious sexual offences. So you're already alive to some issues, and there are processes. But those supervisory ratios and staffing, those are all implications you're going to have to look at, aren't they?
Absolutely, and no criming, decisions to close an investigation, i.e. you've got an offence did take place, you can't locate an offender, that's now quite difficult to work through. So what does it mean? At what point does the trigger plan for a review work to go back into that? That's all work in policing we now need to look at in terms of doing the work post this. And clearly we're a few hours after the judgment, so as with colleagues across policing, we're trying to work through, so what does this mean? What does it mean for current practice and approach? What types of crime is it particularly applicable to? We've spoken about rape and serious sexual offence. You can see child sex abuse, human trafficking, potentially some types of violent crime. You know, we just need to work that through collectively with people in the cold light of day and say, this is what it means, this is what we need to put in place, and this is what we do.
Obviously a force, and not just the Met, but it's short of detective skills and investigative skills at the moment. That's going to put added pressure, is it not?
It is, but I think it's not a day to talk about sort of, you know, can we have more resources, that sort of, it's actually a day to say, look, we've got some things wrong in this, we made mistakes, we've got to make sure, as we have done, that all the work post those investigations, the reviews around them, those things are systematic and embedded. But you're absolutely right. You then have to look at what does this mean for the future, and how do you make some of those balances as you go forward.
Thank you.
Sorry, it was the issue of screening out crime, and I was going to go back, given the circumstances where we are in safeguarding children, that must be an area that needs some immediate thought about, not just for the future, but in terms that we're going to have a number of cases brought in that area against us.
And this is where there is an awful lot of detail in the judgment. So some of the safeguarding ones absolutely will fall into that category. Some may not. So we need to. That's why we genuinely do need to go and work through and understand those sorts of things. As you know, with the work the Deputy Mayor's overseeing and others, there's an awful lot of work going on in terms of safeguarding and both our response to it, but also those action plans that we put in place 18 months or so ago now, and addressing those.
Yeah, Craig, your panel report is having said that you may need to look at resources for investigations, and in particular, considering moving resources from other areas such as fraud. Is that right?
So what we talked about is to try and give people it's literally to be an example. We're not talking about any form of equivalence here between different types of crime, but some investigations will absolutely engage Article 3. Other investigations won't. And we need to, and all we're saying at the moment, we need to understand whether we need to balance resources differently based on which articles are engaged. That was the reason we needed to test these sorts of judgments.
They end up being engaged with the article which deals with protection of property and...
Yes, you can, but as you know, in the in the Human Rights Act, there is a sort of a scale around the various rights and breaches, and just because you breach a right doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong.
But the problem basically is we haven't got enough resources to go around. I know you don't want to comment on that, but inevitably, if you're having to rob Peter to pay Paul, that's...
Well, I think that there's a wider issue, and I'm sure we'll just touch on it when we get to disclosure and other. As you look at various areas and say, that's the standard I want in that space, that's the standard I want in that space, that's the standard I want in that space, the variable bit in the middle gets smaller and smaller, and the choices become more challenging the further you go into that. That's what we wrestle with in policing.
Good. Yeah, thank you for that. As you consider the implications, the committee will revisit this and speak to you and others about that. Okay, turning to the agenda, we like to raise at the top of the list knife crime. This was something we did want to speak to you about, but reflecting very much on the tragedy last night of losing 2 young people, we wanted to probe a little bit deeper around this. And I think Andrew wanted to lead, particularly as it's your constituency.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, obviously we had this real tragedy last night with two young men being knifed to death within half a mile of each other in my constituency in Kentish Town and Belsize Park. According to the reports, there were reports of other stabbings across Camden, and have you any information about that?
I don't have that in front of me at the moment. I mean, clearly what we're looking at the moment, you'd expect all the lines of inquiry in terms of are the links between these cases, what are the backgrounds to them, and I expect more detail around that will emerge. I think like everyone, and I think members will have seen what the Commissioner said this morning, and I know others have said, you know, at the moment it's a senseless waste of 2 young lives on the streets of London, and it's happening too often.
Yes. Well, we've seen continuous rises in knife crime, and it's not just the last couple of years, is it? It goes back to at least, look at my figures, 2014 is when the knife crime rises started.
Yes, so I think I've spoken before. I always use knife crime under 25 in our data, knife crime victims under 25 as the one that gives the best feel for what's going on. And it was about, on my graph, about second quarter of 2014, it started to kick up. On those figures, we have started to see a little bit of a plateauing, but that in no way makes up for what we've seen in terms of the outcomes around individuals.
And returning to last night, you put a section 60
yes.
Ordering, I don't know if you call them orders or what, but you put one in place last night, and that presumably, if I'm right, allows you to stop and search without having a specific reason, anybody, any vehicle or person in Camden.
Yeah.
Has that section 60 been kept in place, or has it been rescinded?
I don't know how long it was put in for.
I think it finished at 7 o'clock
this morning. Usually it's about 12 hours. Clearly it's available again. If we do it, you know, people will make balanced decisions based on the information and intelligence they've got to support the application of a section 60, but put in very quickly last night.
I think it was, yes. And you also put in some additional resources last night.
Yes.
Are they still there?
Yes, so central resources have gone across to the borough. They're supporting it. My colleague Martin Hewitt, the Assistant Commissioner leading territorial policing, is out there at the moment as we speak, looking at what other support we can give in terms of the challenges, and trying to understand, are these one-off incidents in terms of what took place between groups or individuals last night, or is there something more to this? Because that's the important thing to allow us to plan for, is there a further problem? We're
going to have those resources for a little while yet until it settles down. And if we need the section 60 reinstated.
If you need section 60, I was Graham McNulty, DAC McNulty last night, people will put section 60 in place. And the Commissioner and everyone has been absolutely clear on that.
And in due course, perhaps we could have the numbers for the stop and searches, whether they went up or not. And compared to normal, obviously, it's too early to have that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that and for your responses there. Moving from the borough-specific to the general issue about the rise in knife crime, last night's tragic events brought it to 16, I believe, young people we've lost this year with knife crime rising. We're aware clearly of the strategy that's been published, and the Mayor's very recent commitments indeed this week about extra funding. We want to have some conversations around that at the moment. So Caroline, did you want to?
Yeah, thank you. So as I was saying, in the year to January, 27% rise in knife crime offences, 14,500, 15% rise in knife crime with injury offences, and obviously the number of under 25-year-olds dying has gone up by 10%, but if you actually look at the overall figures, you know, it's a wide range into the 30s, 40s, people are dying from this. Each borough has been tasked with having its own plan on knife crime. Perhaps the Deputy Mayor, can you outline what's the focus of these plans? Is it about prevention? Is it about reaction? What's going into those plans?
Just to say at the beginning, I mean, we absolutely recognise that we have an issue with knife crime and the rising knife crime, and the murders last night are absolutely awful and just so sad. In terms of the action plans, those are led by the Metropolitan Police, by the borough commanders, and they are partnership action plans, so they should and do take on the full gamut of the enforcement activities of the Metropolitan Police, but also the partnership activities around prevention and early intervention. For example, I have regular meetings with those boroughs who have the most knife crime incidents in their boroughs, and we have looked at their action plans and gone through their action plans, and there's some really good work happening at the local level as part of the partnership working. You know, in Croydon, I went down to Croydon last week to talk to them about what they're doing. It is across the gamut of working with trading standards, working to make sure that knives aren't available and aren't so easy to buy, but also working with local programmes and organisations like a boxing club in Croydon, but doing some serious, really looking at and analysing what is happening to the young people and those that are getting involved in crime. That's just one example of Croydon, but we are working our way through looking at the boroughs, talking to them about what it is that we can do to support them from City Hall or from the Metropolitan Police, but also talking to them about if there are any barriers, how can we help them overcome them.
What are the common elements you're seeing across these borough plans?
So the common elements are the ones that we've, the five boroughs that came in recently are very much around enforcement, but around working with the communities, around prevention and working with young people and with families. Really is, you know, everyone's talking about it at the moment, a public health approach locally with the support of the Metropolitan Police and ourselves. That public health approach is happening locally.
Okay, and how are you holding the boroughs to account for their work in this area?
Well, we're working with them in terms, and we are looking at, you know, the Metropolitan Police will have their own way of holding their own borough commanders to account on their performance, and you do that through crime fighters. And as that is a regular meeting that will look at the figures and look at the performance measures of that. But we are working with the local boroughs in terms of their work and how they are delivering the partnership working.
Okay, but still didn't really answer something from the policing side, but if it's everyone working together, how you're making sure that they're delivering the action plan and it's getting results?
Well, that's the programme of work that we are involved in at the moment. We've had 2 meetings with the top 5 boroughs, and the first meeting going out to the local communities. It isn't just about holding to account. It is also about saying, you know, going and discussing with the local authorities and their partnerships in the local schools. What else can we be doing to support you? Because actually, when you do go and talk to the boroughs and talk to the local police and the local communities, they are all working very hard and they are prioritising tackling violence. The question is, what can we do to support them and to make sure that that is effective as possible? Provide them with the evidence of what works, provide them with some of the funding that's needed through the community seed funding, which we'll be announcing shortly, but also through the £15 million that the Mayor has already announced around the police's putting into the police budget to tackle knife crime. What can they be doing to use that money for effectively tackling knife crime in their local area and working with young people?
Something else will pick up questions about that fund in a little while, but how are you using these conversations you're having with the boroughs and these detailed action plans to actually help you assess how the Met is doing in trying to tackle knife crime?
We have, I get regular reports around knife crime, around the incidence of knife crime, and you know where it is going up and where it is, you know, the differences in the incidents, and that is how we assess the impact, you know, what is happening, and how we look to make sure that we understand what is happening at the local level. But there's also the Metropolitan Police's own performance framework through crime fighters around holding borough commanders to account, but also enabling them and supporting them to do the work that they need. I have those regular reports of the data, and that's what we look at.
How are you able to work out what things are actually having a success? Because when you've got a huge issue like this, and I remember years ago when I was a borough councillor, it was teenage pregnancy was the issue. You throw everything at it and you've got every initiative under the sun going on, and then you look back on it however many months later or whatever. How do you actually know what it is that's working so that that's where you can prioritise resources?
Through the Evidence and Insight team that is based in MOPAC, Mayor's Office of Policing and Crime, we have looked at the evidence of what works and looked at the evidence of those diversionary programmes of what works, how, and to make sure that what we are putting in place is evidence-based. You're absolutely right. I mean, I remember the teenage pregnancy programme had fantastic results, but was there one thing that people could say that's the one thing that made the difference? There's always going to be that problem because there are so many interdependencies around it. But the fact that our programmes and projects are based on evidence to begin with enables us to have some confidence that by putting them together in a programme of work, you can have an effect.
And from your point of view, Craig, what are you doing to make sure resources are being deployed effectively?
I think a couple of things to hopefully add something to that bit of the debate. So recently there's been what we call a datathon. Sounds a very trendy name, doesn't it? But basically and really good idea, it was getting our analysts and colleagues with data, colleagues from MOPAC and the Insight team here, colleagues from City Hall, Home Office analysts together, all looking at data sets against 7 key questions around knife crime. And that work has looked at things like, is there a link between knife crime and social media activity? I.e., can you see a peak before it happens? At what point do people who later become victims, is there a point in their history they become offenders, victims, all the way through? So we're doing an awful lot of work to try and understand what is going on. It's fair to say as well, and we've spoken before here about the international comparators. We've all looked actually with the Home Office nationally and with policing at what's going on around violent crime across the Western world, because with a few exceptions it's going up. And I think if you ask academics, they'll say to you, we don't fully understand all the reasons why that's happening. Now, there are a number of hypotheses that people are looking at. Is it linked to more availability of drugs and the violence within the drugs market? Is it linked to different age profiles of population? It is a sad factor that when you have a predominantly younger population, you get more offending, but usually the seriousness tails off as people get older. So there are a whole range of things people are doing to see what works. I think your point, so you saying, I remember the stuff you did around teenage pregnancies, I think we've all been very careful to make sure we don't forget the lessons we learnt some years ago with knife crime around that intensive police activity has its role, but if you can't engage the wider community and London in this, then, we often use the phrase arresting is not the only way out of this. It's absolutely part of it, but we need everyone in behind us. How do we look at what people are doing? The Deputy Mayor's covered off that we do that through both our work around crime fighters, where we predominantly look at outlying boroughs and try and understand both good and bad, why things are where they are. Look at things where there's a norm in activity. So we've spoken before here about the work we do around stop and search, looking at why one borough can do an awful lot of stop and search with the full support of the community and get results X. The 1-2 boroughs away doesn't do it and gets, go on, understand that, let's talk it through. There might be very real reasons, but that's the level of granularity and detail you have to get into to manage performance. And just for the Deputy Mayor as well, the other thing she touched on, I don't think we've had an oversight board where the Commissioner and I are not asked about knife crime. And I think you'd expect that to be the case. So we're asked, where are we, what are we doing, what's the performance look like? So that's a common feature.
Okay, and just finally, you talked about these borough action plans. Can they be shared with the committee?
Yeah.
I'd have thought so. I'll check if there's any reason why I can't. Yeah. They're shared with community safety partnerships at a local level. I would have thought the ones that
those of us who sit on the community.
I was going to say you'd see that anyway. Yeah.
And then I did have one final question I forgot over the page to Deputy Mayor. The Mayor's knife crime strategy, how effectively do you think it is tackling the drivers of knife crime?
As you'll know, the knife crime strategy has absolutely tried to set out how, in terms of the police's role and enforcement and the really important aspect of the police using all the powers that they have. But it's very, very clear that you can't just, you know, as Craig has already said, the police cannot tackle this alone. And it sets out, in terms of the drivers of crime, around some of the issues around making sure that young people, through schools and through education, have the aspirations, have the ability to fulfil their aspirations and have those aspirations in themselves. But it is very much through the strategy, we really are looking at all those different drivers around some of the trauma, some of the mental health issues that young people are affecting young people, making them more likely to be violent, whether that's through knives or other forms of violence. We have those processes in place, we're investing in that. The Mayor has last week announced the Youth Fund, which is £45 million worth of money, £45 million of investment over the next 3 years, substantial amount of investment really in young people, looking at what the programmes and wanting to invest in programmes that will help them make the right decisions and move away from crime or not get involved in crime in the first place. But as you know and I know, that's just incredibly important though that is. It's not going to make up for the government cuts in this area. We know, Sian's done a good report on the £22 million of youth services. I'm sure it's more than that now, being taken out of London. London schools are going to have a deficit of, going to have £99 million taken away from them in the next year. And mental health services, I think by 2020, will also have, I think it's £1 billion gap. These are services that young people absolutely rely on and that we rely on to support young people, to enable them to do the right thing and to do the right thing, to fulfil their ambitions, to go to school and not get involved in crime. Very much.
Wilbert, you want to come in on this?
Yeah, can I just carry on from there?
Please do.
I mean, Sophie, you talked about the cuts and so on, but can I put this to you very specifically? The Commissioner told the BBC, I think this recently, that I know exactly where I would put them if I had more resources, and it would be into this issue, i.e. knife crime. So what more could the Met be doing in this area if it does not receive a real terms cut from central government?
So that's why, I mean, in terms of resources, that is why the Mayor has announced he's going to put £15 million into the Metropolitan Police to tackle knife crime. We're working with the Met at the moment around exactly what that's going to be spent on. Yes, it is about making sure there are more officers out and enhancing and increasing Operation Sceptre to make sure that those enforcement powers and that there are the officers on the street to really tackle knife crime. But it is also around how the police can work with young people, divert them away from crime, but also around some of the prevention work. Those are the resources that we've been able to put in. It doesn't make up for the money that's been taken out of the Metropolitan Police budget by the government. We've got to find £325 million worth of savings in the next few years. Found 150 since the Mayor came into power. There's 600 million before that. That has an effect on the number of officers on the streets, and it therefore has an effect on their ability to tackle knife crime, tackle moped crime, tackle burglaries. It really does have an effect on the safety of Londoners.
Last April, MOPAC announced a dedicated fund for new specialist victims and witness services for children and young people. When will this be launched, and what role can it play in supporting victims of knife crime?
That was part of the knife crime strategy that we've refocused some of the money that we have to commission services for victims, very much because whilst, and I know it's not perfect, and I've spoken to parents of victims, of murder victims who've talked to me about some of what they felt there were the failings in some of the services that they've had, and we're going to be looking into that in terms of them as families of murder victims. But those services are there, they need to improve, but they are there. But what was very clear when we looked at the victim services is that there isn't the services that young victims of knife crime need. Sure. So we are working on recommissioning that at the moment. For me, that means ensuring that they get the mental health support that they need because they have been victims, getting the support that they need to enable them to recover, but really, really importantly, getting the support that they need to deal with the trauma, because I often speak to young people, and I'm sure you've spoken to young people as well, who have been victims of crime And it is through that trauma that they have taken the wrong decisions and sometimes go down the wrong route as well. That's what the victim service that we're developing at the moment will start to address.
I'm glad you talked about families of victims, because I was said to the Mayor on more than one occasion at Mayor's question time that I think we can do a lot more to involve families, friends of victims in knife crime campaigns. Very finally, I mean, how do the police service identify knife crime as gang-related? I mean, is it a simple cross-reference on the offender to see if there's a Trident gang matrix or other factors taken into account?
So maybe I'll leave that to Craig, because I think that's an operational sort of.
But by all means, so obviously the gang matrix is part of that work in terms of gang links, and obviously things often come up as you do the investigation. So you know, we're quite careful about saying this is gang related or this isn't gang related. You know, everybody wants that question answered straight away. It's not always straightforward. So the most obvious one is this person someone we have on a matrix or we have information about, is part of a gang or part of an association? And then, as I say, as you go through an investigation, often other things become apparent.
Can I just do on the Trident gangs issue and then maybe go to the colleague? Because it just follows on from that question.
If that's the flow, yes.
Sorry, but, you know, sometimes we take out, look, we're in crisis and we're acting like we're in crisis, and a lot of people are doing a lot of good work from partners and the policing trying to suppress this. We'll never get it down to nil. But, you know, by the police's own admission, you're only saying of the knife crime activity is 5%, and yet we see Trident, the specialist unit, trying to increase its resources when we're told less is less. I think what we want to hear from you, Craig, is where is the Met in terms of putting the resources, in terms of tackling knife crime, and is that the right type? If you're only saying it's 5%, it might be 5% too much on gang-related crime, but there clearly needs to be, there's something else going on in knife crime here.
Absolutely.
And what we need is assurance from you that the Trident a little model is not just, oh, we've got another role here, we better beef up our resources, not, forgive me for my cynicism, but this is a real issue that we need to do it and it needs to be done in this way. And it's just this, you know, is that an action just for the sake of being seen to do something, or is that real?
No,
I can't, you know, by your own admission, it's 5% of all total knife crime.
Yeah, no, so I think, and I think we've spoken about it before, you and I, probably if we'd have been having this conversation 5-6 years ago, we were talking about a higher percentage of knife crime being linked to gangs per se. It is less clear now in terms of those absolute volumes and saying it, and also you have to remember a lot of this relies on flagging and information, so it's not a perfect science, but we certainly saw a phenomenon of the percentage of crimes that you would say that is gang related straight from the start fall away. That's why we've talked about the challenge of almost a culture of acceptability around knives being in some ways far more challenging than the high-end violence that's often associated with the gang-type knife activity. But no, be absolutely clear, some of those specialist assets and techniques you need that Trident and others across the Met area are absolutely what you need to deploy against this sort of criminality. Yes, stop and search, yes, normal policing activity, but where this is most effective, and we see it with the Sceptre Weeks and others, is where I would call that high-end specialist asset and borough BCU asset comes together and works together on the problem, and that's absolutely the model.
And just saying, as we acting like we are in crisis or not, is it not time to put a further push with some of our partners, some boroughs are doing it, some are not, about access to knives and how they're sold in shops and those issues? And we need a bit more of an high profile from maybe the mayor coming into that campaign and supporting those boroughs, but trying to raise the discussion in amongst our communities about that it's too easily to get knives, it's too easily for our young people, and we're not just talking about the zombie knives issues, we're talking about every household items where we need to start thinking very carefully now about how people are accessing that and getting that in terms of some of the crime that's going on in our community.
And to reassure you, there are some really, really good examples out there. I won't name the store, but a real example from meeting most of the retail trade quite recently of a London mini supermarket in South London borough. Early in the morning, young person runs in, clearly distressed and upset, down to the household goods where there are knives, goes to seek one of those, detained, all that done. The store manager then says, actually, you know what, I'm not making, this is I should not be selling these here, I'm not going to sell them here, I'm going to move the way the shop works, look at how we do safeguarding. There's real support, some parts of the industry. I agree with you around getting that consistency across the piece. And I think, as Sophie touched on, a lot of what's in those plans are around some of those diversion things.
We need to step up.
Yeah,
I think is where we are.
Yeah,
and
I'd urge everyone, every one of you has a voice across London, talk about it. Put those challenges in. What are people doing? When did you last have a sort of a covert buying operation to try and get knives? Why is that store got that in that particular way? What do they do about it? It's those sort of conversations. We're doing it with businesses, with communities, right across the piece.
Those covert actions were quite commonplace in many boroughs.
Yeah.
We sense perhaps they've been dropping away. And I saw Joanne.
Can I just pick up on the point of we need to step up, because I think that makes it sound like it's not a priority, and it's not something we're absolutely spending a vast amount of our time trying to tackle through operational policing, but also through the work that we do from City Hall. Karen, you asked me about the governance and sort of the responsibilities. The mayor chairs the London Crime Reduction Board. Knife crime is on that agenda all the time, and through the London Crime Reduction Board, the partners around the table have all been tasked to look at what they are doing around knife crime, and they have been tasked to ensure that they look at what needs to be speeded up, what needs to be different, and what needs to be, what's for the longer term. That's the mayor's role into the London Crime Reduction Board. Comes down to me and Craig as chairs of the board underneath, and has gone to all the partners. That is being tasked out. There is absolutely that priority and absolutely the urgency that is going through the system and has been going through the system for a while.
Yeah. Which is funny from what Craig said, actually. It's a question to Sophie about the importance of the community involvement in all this. And I just wondered how communities were involved in contributing to the development of the borough action plans that Caroline was asking you about.
Mm-hmm. So the Lambeth Community Action Plan has and as Southwark's Action Plan, absolutely been done with the community. It came from the community, has been worked with through young people, and is a very comprehensive action plan. It will vary from borough to borough, but each borough should have had that partnership working, and through the partnership have those links out into the community. I've seen that through the work that Lambeth and Southwark, and I've discussed with them through their action plan, and very much centred around what it is they can do to work with not just the community, but very much in their focus around working with young people, because there's no point in having top-heavy plans that haven't been developed with young people, because we need to really understand what are the needs, what are the reasons, and what are the drivers. And we do understand that, and those are partly through the action plans, but also through the programmes and projects that we have from City Hall, but also through the Metropolitan Police.
Well, that's very reassuring for Lambeth and Southwark, but what about the other boroughs? If we've got these action plans in every borough, I assume we have, and if so, Craig's nodding, and if so, have we had that similar involvement of the community throughout? And if not, why not? And can that be put right?
I couldn't give you a running commentary on every one of the 32 London boroughs. I suspect it will vary. There's certainly community safety partnership involvement and local authority involvement. The level of individual community, I couldn't answer that. I'd need to take that way and look.
Yeah, well, that's the point, trying to get down,
I think
get public buy-in to the plans.
And that is an important aspect of the plans, an important aspect of the work that we're doing jointly with the Metropolitan Police around looking at the plans, and as I said earlier, to look at them about what is in there, but also around community participation, and to analyse that, to look about what else needs to be done. It take a bit of time to do that, but that is certainly something that we are undertaking at the moment.
And perhaps we could have an update on that.
I think that will be useful. I think going back to old MPA days when there were link members, those members would then take probably an intrusive interest in the plans of those boroughs. We've moved away slightly on that. So those of us that are constituency members will probably already have an intrusive interest, but it will be useful for the committee to understand the evolution of the plans. Now, I saw Joanne next, I think.
Yeah, it was a question to Craig and around, you mentioned stop and search, and as you'd expect, there are concerns in some areas about perhaps the language that's being used about we're going to see an increase in stop and search. I was very pleased to see that you said you're going to look at what's working and what's not, because certainly the information, and the research was done out of Blunt too, was that those boroughs that did have big increases in stop and search actually did slightly worse than boroughs that didn't increase in stop and search. For me, it's about monitoring and trying to explain this to my constituents. A riposte I got that was well, just because you put intelligence in front of it doesn't mean it actually is. It's what what information are you giving out to reassure people that this is actually different from what's gone before? And do you have any early indications as to, for example, are your arrest rates still up? And what are those arrests for? Are they for knife crime, or are you just criminalising a group of young people for personal possession of cannabis, for example, which is what we don't want to see happening?
Okay, no, well, I'll try and answer all of that if I can for you. So I think in terms of the sort of visibility and accountability, you've probably been on the website. You can see the stop and search data as it is. You know, it's absolutely there. It's available to people to see. Members of the community can see it and hold us to account around it, and they do in terms of doing it. I think one of the other big changes, and we've spoken a lot about, is the use of body-worn video. So the stop and search monitoring groups, we're probably the first place, as far as we know, we're the first place in the world, let alone in the country, where we've got an information sharing agreement with the monitoring groups and the Met that's been agreed and seen by information commissioners, etc., so we can share body-worn video with the monitoring groups. So instead of talking about, well, do you want to check this slip? Come on then, have a look. Let's have a look at a stop and search in Lambeth, in Camden, wherever it may be. It gives us a different level of real accountability for the monitoring group in terms of the ability to look at and see those. So I think body-worn video is a huge step forward in terms of that. Are we alive to the issues around criminalisation and limits of effectiveness of powers? Absolutely, and I think that's where people have taken a lot of the learning from the past and brought it forward into today. I've got the numbers for you. I'm more than happy to give them to you rather than perhaps read them all out now to you. But I've got all that for our activity during sector weeks and others, so more than happy to share those with you.
Thank you, yeah.
Okay, John, happy with that? Right, thank you. Peter, you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Deputy Mayor, Sophie, I saw recently when you were being interviewed on the, I think it was Sunday Politics, about knife crime, and there was a lot of discussion of the Scottish approach. You're in favour of that, are you not? Or if you are, could you, you did signify that you were in favour of that approach on the programme. And I wondered basically how much that's informing the way we're treating knife crime now in London.
So there's been a lot of discussion around the public health approach in Scotland, and absolutely, and we're very clear in the knife crime strategy, and we talk about the need and the fact that the strategy takes a public health approach around ensuring that you understand the drivers and try and do the preventative and the early intervention work. But what's not often talked about in terms of the approach in Scotland is that when they started it, they absolutely, and they still do, make sure that it is coupled with enforcement. They really did look at and make sure that they were effectively using stop and search, and they campaigned for higher sentences. So the Scottish approach, yes, it is about public health, but it is also about enforcement. And I believe our strategy and the way that we are approaching this from City Hall and in the Metropolitan Police, it is a combination of the two. One of the things they did in Scotland was very much around information sharing through accident emergency units. And we have the information sharing to tackle violence. I think it's 27 of the accident emergency units are now signed up to that. It's 29 in London. the two that aren't, it's not because they're recalcitrant and don't want to. There's issues around IT systems and they are coming on board. Now that information sharing is vital in terms of tackling the violence and hotspotting, but we've gone further and we've put youth workers into accident emergency units, and we're rolling it out not just from the four major trauma centres, but we'll be rolling it out to other accident emergency units as well. So that public health approach is very much embedded in the work that we're doing.
I'm very encouraged actually to hear you say that it was done, you know, in tandem with enforcement, because this is something that quite often when this is discussed, people just think it's a kind of hello flowers, hello trees approach, and all the rest of it, and you don't get this kind of thing. But I think that there's quite a bit of evidence actually with the Scottish scheme to suggest that in fact it was the upping of sentences and indeed there was more stop and search. There was like 4% more stop and search in Scotland, which actually precipitated this sudden drop. Isn't that right? And in fact, in the past 2 years, they've in fact relaxed stop and search in Scotland, and lo and behold, it started to go up again. The conclusion I draw from that is that stop and search is incredibly important, but basically people should feel that they are going to be punished for carrying a knife, and it's as simple as that. Do you not think?
I think that is an agreement. Can I just come?
No, but the point is that it's all very well taking this holistic thing, but if you don't basically have strong punishment behind it.
I think we've been very clear. We were clear in the knife crime strategy. I've been clear. The Mayor's been clear. And Craig and the Commissioner are very clear that stop and search is an absolutely effective tool in tackling knife crime and getting to those young people, well not just young people, but to those people that are carrying knives and taking knives off the street. We're really clear about that. And when we talk about stop and search, what we talk about is that where knife crime is increasing, you should expect stop and search to increase. It of course has to be intelligence led, and of course it must be done professionally and effectively, because we do have to be very careful and we need to understand that it can cause some tensions. However, it is an effective tool, and part of that is to go back to what Joanne was asking about, is there to be effective monitoring. Body worn video, as Craig has said, I think is a game changer. It's an absolute game changer, and I think it's really innovative of the Met and very open of the Met to allow the community monitoring groups who are there to keep an eye on stop and search at the local area. They have access to that body worn video material. I think it is, as you said, the first time, and it is incredibly important that continues.
I think exactly, I'm very encouraged about the body video. I mean, I would say, surely you say, you know, there can be increased tensions or whatever, but would you not agree that this is a crisis point? In fact, I'm amazed that people in London are not more concerned about it than they appear to be, actually. I mean, that, you know, frankly, this is a murder crisis, that it's almost worth, is it not, just risking some tensions if it means some people stay alive.
I'm very clear that the murders that we're seeing at the moment, it feels like a crisis. It is incredibly worrying and concerning, and I don't think you can easily say that most people aren't concerned about it in London. Young people, families and parents that I speak to are concerned about it. We see it come through in the surveys that we do through public attitude surveys. I certainly, when I go out into communities talking to people, they are very, very concerned about it, because it doesn't just affect, well, we all know, it doesn't affect just the family of the young person who is murdered. It affects the schools and it affects the communities. It affects everybody's feeling of safety. It is incredibly worrying and it's incredibly saddening as well.
Thank you.
I think it's fair to say, and to support that it is recognised across the communities. I mean, I've cited an example of a meeting in North Croydon that was packed out, largely with mums who were concerned about their young people. And that was unprecedented. We haven't had that before.
I don't think there's, in defence, I don't think there is the media urgency that there should be.
I think there may be, Peter. Anyway, signal next time. So if I may say, thank you for coming to Croydon the other week. I thought that meeting was good. And also to add to this debate, it reflected around that table, particularly the voluntary sector groups, the difference of opinions. We discussed this. So talking about stop and search, one young man said, we want more. Another young man said, we want less. So it's an interesting debate. That the fact of the matter, under the previous commissioner, stop and search was going very much that way, and there was a connection within crime, and the commissioner righted that balance. You'll remember that, Craig. So there actually is and can be a correlation there. Anyway, we're moving now. Well, you mentioned earlier about the extra funding that the Mayor's announced, and Sian's got some questions around that.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much. I did want to ask, in relation to some of the discussion that's preceded this, something about community support and intervention in the aftermath of a attack, because that's where we're at the moment in Camden. And you mentioned, Craig, that the police are sending down particular teams to support the investigation, to make sure there's a strong police presence, strong police activity. But I wanted to ask the Deputy Mayor, the police there are calling on the community to do more to help them prevent retaliatory attacks. Are there things that MOPAC can be doing outside of the police to provide healing support to communities, to prevent attacks leading to further attacks? I know in your police and crime, your knife crime strategy, you said you would be developing a plan for working with partners and communities following serious knife-related incidents to try and bring people together, spread positive messages. Is that plan, does it exist? Is it in action today in Camden?
So we are still developing that plan because we've been focusing on other aspects, and you do have to, in terms of priorities. But we have also put nearly £250,000 worth of money into the community seed funding. And I haven't seen the programmes and projects that are going to come through on that. Those decisions being taken at the moment. But I really hope that part of what that is about communities bidding to come together to not just absolutely in the aftermath of an incident or of a terrible murder, and that really is about helping communities to do that. So that plan isn't in place at the moment, but it's something we're working on.
Okay. The public health approach you've mentioned a couple of times. That was the theme of Assemblymember Whittle's intervention just now. You've said a few times today that various things that are part of that public health approach. You've said here and there that it's embedded in things that you do. I asked the Mayor in December and the Commissioner whether they would be taking a public health approach. They said yes. But when you read through the knife crime strategy, which came out last June, a public health approach really isn't the theme of that. It isn't strongly stated that it is. And I wanted to ask whether we're going to get, I don't know, an update to the knife crime strategy, some new announcements, some new plans, something that outlines how you're going to be doing a public health approach in a more set out way, because at the moment we are sort of picking bits and pieces out from here and there.
So I don't agree with you. I think the knife crime strategy is very clear in terms of making sure that the elements of the public health approach are there. And we don't intend to produce a review of the knife crime strategy. What we are focusing on is delivering it with our partners and making sure that where we have the evidence, we can absolutely push forward on delivery, because that's absolutely what we need at the moment. We're talking about the murders that were last night. We have already moved into the action stage of that and the delivery stage of that, and that's what we will be doing. Doesn't mean we won't look at, and back to Caroline's point, review the effectiveness of the strategy to make sure that actually it is having an effect, and what are the action plans that are being put in place and how are they effective. That absolutely will continue. We will look at it, but we're not intending to provide a different review, because we've now know about Scotland. We knew about Scotland beforehand. We had taken the evidence from that and we have adapted it to London, because whilst you can very much always and should learn good practice, not just from Scotland but elsewhere as well, you can't just transplant it, as we found out from, I think it's Operation Shield in the last administration, which was very much just a transplant of what looked like good practice but wasn't so effective in London because of the different circumstances of London.
Okay, well, we'll be following up on that. I think some clarity on how you're applying it would be useful. I'm not saying review it, but you're saying there are elements within the plan that do constitute the public health approach, and I think we will need to talk more about how you set that out and how we can sort of judge it. But it's not necessarily about making different plans as much as it's about being clear about the approach that underlies them. I don't know if that makes sense. Moving on though to the work more on the root causes, which is the funding announcements that have been made recently. Obviously, there's £15 million gone into the Met to tackle knife crime. I think we've discussed that. You've talked about it already this afternoon. How that is largely enforcement work and work that the police themselves are doing. But very welcome last week, the Mayor announced a new £45 million fund to support young Londoners, which is really great news. As you mentioned, I've been working on the cuts to youth services, the general youth services from councils, the more specific youth services too. The funding gap there is growing and growing. It is above 22 million, as we've been talking about. I keep showing the Mayor my updated report when I got responses from more councils, which had had 36 million pounds in it last March, and it is a bigger number that I'm getting through from councils this year. I think 45 million pounds will go some way, but it's spread over 3 years. I think we're looking at restoring, less than a third of the cuts that have been made with that 45 million pounds. Nevertheless, it's really good news, and it's way more than we were expecting. There's not much detail yet about how it's going to be spent. What we've heard so far is there's going to be 10 million a year for local communities, schools and charities to bid for funds, and 5 million a year to grow and develop projects currently funded by City Hall. So can you clarify that for us? Because I think some of this might be going into London Crime Prevention Fund potentially through MOPAC, or will it be staying within the Mayor's sort of central budget and given out as grants by him and not through you? If you can clarify a bit more, that would be great.
So, I'm glad you absolutely, I completely agree with you. I think it's fantastic and good news for young people in London that there is this amount of money going in. But you are right, it will not bridge the gap from the money that has been taken out of youth services or taken out of education or all the other services, and the voluntary sector has really suffered under the cuts that the local authorities have had to make, and that isn't a criticism of local authorities because they've had to make it because of the cuts that they have had. But in terms of how that money's been spent, we will be announcing shortly. It's only a few, probably a few days since the announcement of the actual fund and the ability to provide that money. But it will be, there is that divide between going straight out to the community for community projects in the voluntary sector and some money which will be look at scaling up some projects. For example, such as the community seed funding. We're hoping we might be able to scale that up because we only had a small amount of money to put into that. We're working on those on how that will be delivered and how that will be put in, and we have to make, if it is going to be through MOPAC, it will come down through MOPAC, not necessarily through the London Crime Prevention Fund. We're working at what they call the mechanics of it.
Okay, that's really useful. Well, will councils be able to bid in? I know that the list doesn't say, it says local communities. Is it possible that councils can bid?
I think at the moment it's very much focused on trying to make sure that we're providing funding for local communities and voluntary sector organisations. We're looking at the mechanics and we've got to finalise the details around that.
Okay, we'll look at that. And how will the impact of the funding be measured? I think as my colleague Caroline was saying a while ago, you can spend money on all the different initiatives and everyone says theirs is the best idea. How are you going to measure which ones really are effective?
This comes back to the conversation we had around with Caroline as well around the evidence, because actually in terms of the types of projects and programmes that we would want to fund must be evidence-based, and some of them will be innovative, and part of this is you do have to try new things. Not everything will work, but you do need to try. But actually we do have a body of evidence about what does work in tackling crime and knife crime and what does work with young people. But as part of that funding criteria, we will have to have the ability and put into that, how do you measure effectiveness and how do you measure impact, and that will be part of the way that the funding is delivered.
Will you seek to enhance the evidence base with evidence from this spending? Because it is quite a significant amount.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a fantastic opportunity to, one, work with evidence and build on evidence that we have, but two, also try new things. And I think that is important because things move on and you do need to, and that's why I think community and voluntary sector groups are so important in this area, because they are often the places where innovation takes place and then can grow. Yes, absolutely, we will hope that we'll add to the evidence base that we have about what works for young people.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, the money is welcome, and we look forward to hearing more details around that. You mentioned about performance measures, both on the new funding and also the borough plans, and we'd be interested going forward how those boroughs are held to account. And by whom and how that is measured, if there are any performance measures out there, because clearly at the moment there doesn't seem to be any specific measures, but that's to be welcomed. Just to reflect upon some of the thoughts, indeed this is a crisis. I think it is recognised by Londoners, and certainly by this building, that we are in a crisis situation, losing far too many young Londoners, and far too many young Londoners are leaving home with a knife and trying to settle their differences using extreme violence, and that has to stop, and this committee will be scrutinising the Mayor and also the Met to ensure that Londoners are kept safe, and we will continue with that very serious work. If we may now move to another item. The announcement last week, the World Trade announcement last week about the changes to the basic command units, an item, a topic that this committee has taken a very invasive interest over the previous months. But now the announcement has been made, and we've got some detailed questions around that. I'll set the scene initially to you, Deputy Commissioner. Now the announcement has been made. My first observation and comment is around there will be a narrative around savings, and we're going to explore some details around that later. But also, I think historically the Met has often seen the, shall we say, the lack of sense in 32 commands, and has had aspirations for larger commands over a period of time around improving service, not just saving. So I'd be interested, Deputy Commissioner, about what sort of areas you expect both efficiencies to be made, and we'll get into more detail later about the numbers, but also what improvements Londoners may expect, because these are radical changes, Craig. I'm sure you'll agree.
Absolutely agree, and thank you for that in terms of the detail, in terms of where we go. I agree, this is a subject that's been looked at a number of times in London, about the size, the focus of delivery units, about how we can get and we've often explored here the fact that a really good idea is in this particular borough in London, 3 boroughs away, they've never heard of it. And we struggle sometimes to get consistency in the model and delivery. We also know, and we've touched on this a number of times, that one of the areas we've struggled with is when we've had services that were delivered centrally, particularly around some of the work around safeguarding and child sexual offending, and then you had a local service as well. What would happen if you were unfortunate enough to be a victim, you could actually end up getting passed from officer to officer to officer as you go through the process. So we looked at this as an opportunity to both improve services but also make efficiencies in terms of what we're doing. And you know, this work's been in the gestation and the delivery probably over the last 18 to 24 months in terms of testing it, in terms of robustly looking at it, and also in particular it's a challenge that was raised a number of times over the last 6 months in this meeting. As we look towards an unclear medium-term budget figure, have you got a model you can flex? And we absolutely feel that this is what we can do. So it's very much around building it around our core services in terms of what we do around neighbourhood policing, what we do about that response policing in terms of what we do, criminal investigation, and the safeguarding element. That's how we've built these services up.
Okay. We'll have some detailed questions around that in a minute. You're looking there, we talked about savings, but also it's been a long aspiration to improve services, for your perception from the centre. But this is a time in London of crisis at certain crime levels and some real issues out there. What would be, in your mind, and you probably will have judged this, the key risks in this new model at a time of very high crime levels, Craig?
So I think the risks are, and we absolutely learned some lessons, which is always what it was intended to do from the Pathfinders. So we need it's getting the key leadership teams in place early, which we've done as we start to do this. It's phasing the rollout, so you can't just suddenly say, hey, we're all gone, this is the new structure, we're all there. It's absolutely doing that. It's early intervention when you see a change in performance. So some of the challenges we saw around, particularly around ICAL performance, immediate response performance, it's getting that early intervention in. It's the way we're looking at the impact in details of the change, so we know who's moving where, and what we do. There is a much, much better resourced plan to support that rollout and change. But those are the risks. The other risk If you remember, we don't often talk about this, but we actually started the Pathfinders and did that work just as we went into the Westminster attacks, Grenfell, Tower Bridge, Finsbury Park. All of those happened literally as we're doing those changes. So, you know, we are probably more alive than anyone. This city runs and functions 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We are working and changing a live system. That's why we're taking that step-by-step approach to deliver it.
I'll have questions later about assessing performance on the rollout. You're saying that the rollout is staggered?
Yes.
Are the timings published now?
I think they are.
No, I don't think we've published. I mean, I think in terms.
That's not the exact timings, but the order, shall we say?
I don't know if it's been published, but it's not a.
It's not a secret.
No.
I can share it with you.
If you could,
I'll give it to you. So
I think there's a lack of clarity about. I think we know the first rollout.
Yeah, and you know.
And I know that Croydon's last.
Yeah.
But I don't know what happens in between.
I'm more than happy to.
Yeah, I know.
You've got all the other members excited.
They all know, but I don't.
No, I'll make sure you've got that.
That's helpful. No, and we'll have some questions. I'll bring people in a second about the review of the model through the Pathfinders and the review of the command structure. And I think we've got questions about savings on that, because I think you've tweaked the command structure and the number of superintendents and chief inspectors. So I think we need to explore that. So colleagues like to come in on any questions at the moment?
Yeah, I'll come in. Okay, can we just start off with the Pathfinders and the technical document you produced alongside the announcement, which I read with interest. So, Pathfinders are intended to test ideas that have been considered and been in development for a number of years, providing learning as to what works and what does not work to support the wider rollout. Okay, tell me. So this suggests to me, reading that the evaluation wasn't so much about based on whether the BCU model would be rolled out, but is about merely on finding out the best way to implement the changes in the future implementation plan. Is that correct? Well, I just want to clarify this, because I'm not clear, do you know what I mean, in terms of Met speak of where we were on the Pathfinders and those issues, because we changed a number of actions during the Pathfinders, and clearly we had to deal with hopefully it should be an exceptional year in terms of what you had to face in abstractions. So tell me, what is the Pathfinder? What was the method of the Pathfinders then?
Literally, as it says in the document, there were Pathfinders to learn how to make that model work and work effectively across London, which is exactly what that says in terms of the work around it. And you know, when you face some of the other challenges we've talked about, we're always clear, you know, and we've had this conversation a number of times in here, the 32 borough model below a certain level in the Met, and we can argue all day, what should it be, where should it be, it's not sustainable in terms of a delivery model. You have to change it. That's why we've been doing this work for the last 2 years.
Drivers for the change is police numbers, and the drivers of the change is that if you have less police, you've got to work differently.
But it's both as well, because we, you know, I think this is where the challenge is. You can also improve service, and it's something.
I'll get onto that.
But I think it's a really important point, because it's quite a struggle internally to say you can change service and improve it and take things out.
Come on to your ambitions, because I think they'd be shared around the table if they were good enough. Okay, savings in terms of that. I'm just still unclear about the savings arising from this model of working. So what savings are there in the BCU then? What are they?
So the figure we've published is 73 million across the piece.
Yeah, I have some difficulty with this figure around for the BCU. Well, yeah, why? Yeah. I mean, because partly, is it not a case of double counting? Because we're losing those officers anyway, because that 73 figure of cashable savings is based on... and you describe it, I share it probably, the overall strengthening local police programme is expected to deliver a reduction in 1,583 officer posts, realising a savings of 99 million, but cashable being 73 million. But surely, in terms of the numbers we've been talking about over the years in the budget, isn't really based on the BCUs. They were going to come out anyway. So what are the BCU savings for the change?
They are, sorry,
They're just surely based all on the BCU. These numbers are not, there's no double counting, there's no...
These are savings as a result of it. So the service lines at a very high level across the Met have thousands of officers in. This service line in local policing will have approximately 1,583 less. That is to say, now I accept absolutely you're saying you've got to take that money out anyway. But we're just saying that is a saving. We're going to try and deliver the service across London with those service standards that we've talked about and take £73 million out.
Yeah, but so, let's go back. Yes, I mean, my colleagues are whispering to me because we're not quite just convinced by this argument. So if we didn't have the BCU changes, we'd still be...
If you took 1,583 officers out of boroughs, I can think of 5 or 6 that would fall over tomorrow. It wouldn't work. You couldn't deliver the service.
You're saying those numbers were going anyway, regardless of any change. And if you stood and they fell over and you were out to rearrange, forget about BCUs, talk about the police officer numbers we were talking about before, and in terms of what the government was giving you, we'd be losing those numbers. Are you, the argument is we're just losing those numbers anyway, and you're adjusting the service for the BCUs.
No, I absolutely. So this started from a design about how do you make an organisation that works with a smaller headcount for the organisation. This work, we've spoken about this 3, 4, 5 times over the last 2 years. We've been doing this for over 2 years, this work, to say, how would you get an organisation that could work at a 30,000 establishment and potentially smaller than that? And that money has got to come out of the service line. Now, you can say, well, I'll tell you what, I'll just cut your budgets. Good luck, get on with it, see what happens. Or you can do all this design work, try and design a service that works with less people in it. That's what we've done.
Can I just come in on that, Craig? I'm sorry to cut across. I'm understanding the North West Frontier. We're going to have 100 fewer officers, but they're posts that have been deleted that are on the establishment, but posts that are effectively being deleted. So we're actually running in the 3 boroughs without those 100 officers anyway. So, getting back to Len's point, that cut's already happened without the BCU merger. So where's the additional saving from the BCU merger? Or is there no additional saving? What you're saying is it just makes it more efficient. Because those 3 boroughs are running now anyway.
I don't know the exact establishment figures in your borough.
Well, I understand the North West Frontier we're going to lose 100 officer posts.
But the reality is it's different across different boroughs as to where they are in terms of that, in terms of getting down to their new establishments. So that is absolute. So 1,573 police officer posts. The difference in money, and we'll come on to it, we've reinvested some of that to provide some additional resilience, particularly around supervisory roles.
So let's go back to these numbers. These numbers are directly out of the territorial policing establishment, not the specialised units.
Territorial policing line, yeah.
Okay, so we've now got a new territorial part of policing. Do you want to give us a circa figure of what we're working to on this model?
So with the, I won't guess for you, I'll give it you, but it's come down 1,500 over where we were previously.
So roughly, if you can tell me, out of 30,000 police officers,
30,000. It's about
what have we got in territorial policing?
On the front line on territorial policing, it's about 11 to 12. But I'll get you the exact figure.
Okay, and then are you in a position?
Is that before or after the 1,500 come out?
That's what. Let me get you that exact figure. I'm not going to quote figures off the top of my head. Yeah.
And are you able then, in terms of giving us an assessment for the BCU command of how many are going to be allocated to each of the areas and the formula that's behind that, and then am I going to be able to disaggregate that down to the boroughs within those commands?
No, because of course the services, well, absolutely you could, but the services in some cases, so safeguarding is delivered across all 3. Where are we going to put that?
Fine, that would be across the BCU department. That's a specialised unit within the BCU command.
But it's
what
now
would it be for
to
the safer neighbouring team model?
Yeah.
2+1.
Yeah.
So let's just remind ourselves about this. The 2+1, we were told that if wards were in extreme woe, then they would get extra resources or have those resources allocated to them. In your own document, it talks about where they've been offered they've not been taken or allocated towards, they've been used as the roving support group to that. Is that the model we're working on, say, for neighbourhood policing, or is that a borough-wide model? Is that a BCU model? That can I expect that in my, and I'll put it under the neighbourhood policing model, that I've got the 2+1 dedicated officers, not meant to be abstracted, but actually I'll say this, are sometimes abstracted. We've got from colleagues who put on response. That can't be right, but I can, there are issues here. But, is that 2+1 plus any extra? No, because that might have changed under this model. And do we have a roving support on a borough basis, or is that a BCU basis? I'm not quite clear. What is the service we're saying under Safer Neighbourhood Policing we're going to provide?
2+1 for each ward, got all of that. If you've got additional above that, as they work through the model, some will have, so for things like schools and other things, they will have additional resources. So your flex resource, as you call it, at a thing, will probably operate across the BCU.
Okay, so there'll be a support for all three?
Potentially. Depends where the problems are.
Okay. Right. Okay. Right. So I just want to be clear about the rules we're engaging in, who's doing what and how we cover this.
But your absolute commitment is the 2+1.
And if I asked my people locally, they should be able to tell me those numbers?
Depending on where you are in the rollout and the work done, yes.
Okay, right.
So so the establishment of each ward-based team, what about the word, is 2+1. And if there's more officers, it doesn't affect the establishment. They just happen to be there.
Well, they can. They've got to be on the establishment of the BCU.
Correct.
So they're on the establishment of the BCU.
For the ward establishment.
But what we're trying to do is give some flexibility to local commanders to make some decisions based on the needs they've got in their particular area.
So a bit like a local flying squad.
Well, no, but we just talked about knife crime. Yeah. It's different in different wards. You might, if you're the late turn inspector at Camden tonight, actually welcome the fact I've got 4 or 5 people I can use differently who aren't in the core response team tonight, and I've got the ability to use them differently. I don't think we should be writing that. No, I agree with you, but I'm just, if I may finish, I don't think we should be writing that in a document that says, and they must always be on B ward or C ward.
Okay, so getting back to the original question, just to get it absolutely clear, the ward establishment, for whatever better way of describing it, is 2+1.
Yeah.
The BCU commander will have additional X number of officers available to deploy as he or she sees fit.
And as they're doing their detailed designs, as they move into the ability to have that flexible capability will vary between the numbers they've got on particular BCUs.
Correct, but it won't affect the ward establishment.
No.
Now let's get down to the numbers. Why the varying? The varying would be because the nature of the crimes and demands that they have.
Even by building these bigger units, and you'll see in the evaluation, we've still got a difference between boroughs. I think the smallest borough is about 400,000 population. The BCU, the largest BCU is close to 1 million. You're going to still have variations at 12 units.
Okay, right. Can I just continue, Chair, in terms of just the performance and lessons learned? So in your document that you put down an whole range of issues of lessons learned, but almost, and like lessons are good to learn, from any exercise, but it's almost like in every conceivable area of police operations you're saying you can learn lessons on some of these Pathfinders. So what's your impression of that in the sense of what's come out of the Pathfinders, of what they say? I mean, we're talking about, engagement, I think, is a particular issue, communications, implementation phasing, cultural change, HR planning, skills and training, stabilisation, continuous improvement, leadership and governance. That's about sums up, I mean, we've not even got onto performance yet, about what was going on in these pilots and what were those issues. These are your own words, Craig. I'm not reading back. I want you to tell me that actually, and I say lessons learned is a great thing, but it's almost in every area.
We'd expect to get lots of lessons.
In every area?
This is a big, big change for the organisation. It's a very big change in terms of what we're doing. We're trying to make the organisation move. That's That's why we've talked about the timelines. That's why we've talked about the phasing. So things like HR planning, absolutely. I can show you numerous change documents that would have similar lessons learned in terms of doing them. So you'd learn about. I've touched on the issue around leadership. The leaders who went in the Pathfinders as teams did not have a lot of time together before they went live. So they're literally trying to fix things as they go live. That's never a good way to do it. So we've been absolutely clear with these ones, with the next phase going out. So you can look on our intranet, you can see the two next BCUs that are going, you can see the issues that are being discussed. There's readiness assessments, so all of those lessons absolutely taken through into the next ones.
Forgive me, because it does feel like me that being played back to what I said and some members around this table said at the time when you were doing the pilots. It does say that, because I was raising some of these issues around, are you ready, are the right questions being asked, and what you're actually doing, and are these pilots going to be the right things to do? Okay, can you just clarify why? And I think you've done some very good work, and I think in the technical document it comes back about the performance issues, measuring performance, which I do welcome. But I do think I have to ask the question, why is it taken so long? Why has it taken this document? Because one of the issues we're raising about performance, why we couldn't have had these 6 months ago? So the issues around, I think you've established new performance issues around emergency response performance, priorities, safeguarding, detection rates for sexual assaults, all that, I think is welcomed by us. But why couldn't that have been shared with us much earlier? Why did it take, because these were issues that have been raised by this committee. I don't quite understand the secrecy around those and the development of that.
There's not a secrecy around them in terms of the approach around it. We've spoken here particularly around INS calls in the Pathfinders in terms of that work. I think there's a point when you do an evaluation that you take a stock take. I think if we start presenting, I think you'd have said to me, well, you're only giving me the good bits of the evaluation. You're keeping all the bad stuff till it comes. I don't think we can win on this, frankly. We've put the evaluation together. It's a pretty comprehensive document in terms of what it says, what we did, what's happened around performance. We're being very, very open about what we've done and where we've got to.
I have to say, I think it's a question of damned if you do and damned if you don't on this, because I think actually the evaluation is very, very open and transparent about the lessons learned. When the Pathfinder started up, I know that many of you as members are very sceptical that we would just say it was, the Met would just say it's a success, move on. And I know other people are sceptical about that. But that evaluation, I think, as you've already pointed out, Len, is actually very much around these are the things that should have gone better and these are things that went wrong. And in terms of the timing of the evaluation, you're absolutely right, as you said previously. Response times in the East Pathfinder became totally unacceptable. There was no way we were going to evaluate the Pathfinder whilst response times were like that, because the focus was on getting that absolute emergency service back to where it should be. Once there was confidence that it had gone back to where it should be and it was being maintained, that's when the evaluation started. And I think that's right, because ultimately that was about service to the public, about the emergency service that the police provide to the public, and the focus was on ensuring that that was got right.
Okay, let's get on to performance then, and what we want to see policing improvement. And I think the old tenure of the document is saying, well, actually, we're okay if it's the same as the borough improvement issues, sanction detection rates and all the rest of it. Should we not be looking for more? So, but the actual document says it's okay if we are at borough levels. So what's the thinking of that? If your base document that we're working on, no doubt new BCU commanders and their management teams are working on, is actually it's all right for getting 1 in 10 crimes with a sanction detection rates, and that's it. Do you know what I mean? That's what your document tells me.
I absolutely know what the document says in terms of that.
Right?
No, I know. I absolutely. You and I have had these conversations a number of times. I want better performance around detections and outcomes. I chair the performance board for the whole of the Met. I absolutely want to lift our outcomes and performance detection rate. Absolutely clear on that. The Commissioner's been clear on that. Everyone's been clear on that. What this gives you and what this document gives you are a number of the baselines about where we were and where we go. We will absolutely continue to drive performance up and up and up. Sorry, go on.
So can I ask then, in the new BCU commands, a sanction detection rates of about 1 in 10 is unacceptable and action will be taken?
If they consistently cannot lift sanction detection rates, or they lie outside the norm of the rest of the organisation, then there'll be focus on them, and that's where we'll be. And with 12 round the table, with 5 superintendents in that team, it gives you the opportunity to be able to do that in a meaningful way. Reporting into one Deputy Assistant Commissioner, that gives you a span of command that's manageable.
Do you think, right, and I think there are all sorts of issues, and I'm going to get fair performance in terms of that. I'm quite, in terms of that, I listen to carefully what you say. Some of the issues the MEP said about performance and the performance of boroughs within that, or even the Pathfinders, is the performance of England and Wales, and it's acceptable to do X, Y, Z. As the Met senior management team bottomed out, what are reasonable excuses and what are not reasonable excuses for poor performance?
Yes, I think we have, in terms of where you
and
get...
is there a document you can point me to and say this is what our stance is as a senior management team and this is what we're going to judge our leaders for in terms of the performance in coming years under a new regime? Because this is a new regime.
I can't... Sorry, I thought you meant the question in a slightly different way. So can I tell you what are the issues around when someone comes in and you're being told, please understand it, boss, it's all really hard out here at the moment, or conversely where it's not. So there are a range of things we look at in terms of performance and how we measure performance. I can't give it you in one document, but more than welcome to have a conversation. I'll talk through with you those things we look at, those things where they're real excuses. So things like, if you like, inputs, officer numbers, training, those sorts of things. Days when they've got huge abstractions, why is your performance down low? Months where they've got good performance, bad performance. That's the level of granularity we get into.
Well, I'm going to take a breather now because I want to come back to some of those issues. But don't you think that if it's a new regime, it is a new way of working, that something like that would be useful for the organisation about performance and about issues? And what the issue that I really want to avoid sometimes is about saying, and I think it does tend to do this in the Pathfinders, it talks about, their performance, it talks about the special year and the issues of obstructions. And that tells me that maybe we need a new way of thinking about obstructions because it's a new set of circumstances and what it is. But in terms of some of the issues, he's blaming some of the decline in performance on the rise of rising crime throughout London, England and Wales. Do you know what I mean? I think we've got beyond that a little bit and a bit more be able to bottom out some of the issues of performance in terms of the policing's contribution to it and what's going through.
Absolutely. And I think that's where you get into some of the debates we've been having with the Deputy Mayor and others around things like what is productivity in policing, what is truly effective policing. You all know there have been commissions trying to work this out for many, many years, but those are some of the issues you get to. But to reassure you on that disaggregating England and Wales, you can absolutely do that. And you know the analysis you've seen before where we do it what we call most similar forces. So one of the things I always look at is what's happening in the other large forces. That's the sorts of performance, because they face similar challenges. So are we up or down? Interesting one at the moment, burglary. Our burglary detection rate, I'd like to be much higher. On the data I'm seeing at the moment, it's one of the best in the country in most similar forces. So I want to get us higher in terms of those sorts of things. Other areas of crime, we touched on knife crime. Actually, London's rise in knife crime, we all know, we've seen the horror around it, in percentage terms was smaller than other parts of the country. But so it's important we have that context, but it does not explain away performance that's not working.
We want to come back and press you further on this, and it's maybe something the Deputy Mayor needs to consider whether MOPAC require that about that performance issue, because I think the scrutiny that you're under, and no one of this side of the table, and I know beside you, would not say the pressures you're under in terms of delivery, but in terms of maintaining confidence, maintaining where the money is being spent and the priorities are, then we need to think differently about the performance, and we want to be able. And I think for the workforce, they need to be judged on a fair performance monitor about what is good and acceptable and what is not. Absolutely. And I don't think anyone's accepting some of maybe what we would have probably all agreed on in the past is reasonable now in the circumstances we face.
I mean, you might want to do, it's an offer, as the Deputy Mayor has seen, you might want to see some of the performance data we look at on a daily basis.
And to come on to that when I do a summation.
Some of you will have seen that, and I'm conscious others won't. So that level of performance monitoring is on the desktop all the time. I won't bring it up on my phone, it's not big enough to show you.
I think also, Len, I think that would be extremely helpful because, of course, you will have had over the years the monthly performance, the monthly reports on crime which come to you, and you're now getting very comprehensive quarterly performance reports. Really happy to have part of the session for the next APCC around actually drilling down into some of those figures. I certainly do that at Oversight Board. It comes to you, it is published. We can have that discussion. It's part, it's not part of the pack for today. It's will be part of the pack for March. They are published. We drill down on it. Very happy to drill down on that with you as well.
Okay,
thank you.
That's good. I'll let Len have his breathe. I'm going to bring Tony in a minute. Is it the same subject?
We've got the next one.
Well, no, I'm getting to you in a minute. As I was just about to say, I'll bring Tony in a minute, and then we've got the next line of questioning. I mean, just the points, just to summate on that, so that we can capture it. There's a very good question around the establishment of the new BOCUs as they roll out. Now, the challenge we've got is not as if you're introducing something in one place. This is over the next year, 18 months, and we want to understand the establishment of those new BOCUs, and also about the performance, because you're now entering a whole new model. So how are we able to judge the performance of those, and indeed judge the improved performance, which is Len's points, and also by understanding performance and holding both of you to account. In Len's words, it's beyond the national measures, but it's also, you can take it beyond the finance debate, because we should take it beyond the debate of there's not enough money, so we're not doing very well. We want proper performance figures so that we can judge and challenge you beyond those.
You do get those proper performance.
I know.
They are published. You have them on a quarterly basis.
You've already pointed that out.
We're very happy to take questions on them.
But it will be under a completely new, radically new model. Right, so, Tony.
Can I start with the Deputy Mayor? And this is a question that she heard many times as somebody who was a borough leader herself in the past. If you are in any of these boroughs and you've drawn these wonderful maps of Tri-Borough, where I was involved in Tri-Borough and Westminster, the Royal Borough and H&F, and what we found was it's very difficult and a very, very diverse community across such a large area to actually make sure you don't end up with a magnet. And the magnet, in the case of policing, as you all know, is the West End, the stress area. So how are you going to convince my stakeholders and the rest of my 3 boroughs that all the police are not going to spend their time in the West End, and that actually you'll see police in the Royal Borough, Hammersmith and North Westminster, because they are very cynical and you can't really blame them, can you?
And I recognise the concerns. It's not just in your three boroughs that are going to make up the basic command unit there. It's certainly concerns that I've had from, I would say, nearly every borough are worried if they are next to a high crime borough or a more densely populated borough. They are worried, and I understand those concerns. What we are saying to them, and as part of the leadership and the engagement, is that although there has been the decision to roll out the basic command units, and that is going to happen, it isn't a one-size-fits-all model. That part of the learning from the Pathfinders was to absolutely engage with the leadership, engage with the partnership, and to produce the plans that are bespoke to that area and bespoke to the borough, as well as the basic command unit. I recognise that those words are not necessarily going to be much comfort to yourself or to borough leaders who I've had many conversations with, but that is how we are going forward, and I recognise those concerns.
Thank you. And could I also ask you to respond to my leader in Westminster, Nicky Aitken's letter, which he sent to Sadiq, 2 MQTs. He did promise to chase up a response. Still haven't received a response on this very subject.
Apologies if there's not been a response. I'll make sure she gets a response.
Thank you very much. And in terms of the whole public confidence, I think many of us in this room, including Caroline and Len and I and many others, have in the past talked about lack of communication in terms of engagement in other things that you've done, such as police station, front counter closures for one. How can you reassure me that we are really going to delve into the community, not just talk to assembly members and borough leaders, but you're really going to communicate what you're doing and why? And back to the point that the average resident will want to hear, give me an example of where we'll actually get, dare I say, a better service in any area.
As part of the part of the rollout is that leadership around engagement with the partnerships. Those borough leaders and the partnerships will have those have the ability to reach out to the communities, as does the Safer Neighbourhood Boards, and Safer Neighbourhood Boards will very much be engaged with. It is one of the learnings from the previous, the rollout and the Pathfinder, there wasn't enough engagement. We will certainly make sure that that happens.
No. And I think under the surface, I don't expect you to comment on this, it's just a statement at this stage, but there's an awful lot of talk going on both in the boroughs and in certainly the large retailers and other stakeholders in my part of London, that there may or may not be some deals done in terms of we pay for police or match payment for police or whatever. There's lots and lots of rumours going on about this at the moment. And again, I urge you to really try and engage with the stakeholders, so we don't. There's certainly a perception amongst many of them that you are going to come with a begging bowl and say, we'll pay for 40 police officers, in the way that the Royal Borough, for example, in the past has done. And some people in the community and stakeholders would welcome that discussion, others are very against it, but we don't really know where you are coming from on that.
So I'm not really, obviously it's a bit difficult to me, you know, the concerns that are being raised, I'm not really sure exactly what the concerns are. If it's around Met Patrol Plus, absolutely, we're looking at that at the moment as part of the going forward, and hope to take a decision really soon around will local authorities be able to continue in, those already in it can anyway, but how far into the future that's going to happen. If it's around that, we will be soon coming out and making a decision on that, and that'll be very public, so we'll be able to engage around that. In terms of businesses, I do engage with business. I was with Craig and myself with the Victoria Business Improvement District yesterday, talking to them about our plans, talking to them about priorities, absolutely having that conversation around what does it mean in terms of the context of finances. I don't know what the rumours are that I'm about to go around with a begging bowl. I wasn't about to go around, so it's a little bit difficult to squash rumours if I've not heard them. So.
And last one, just an example with what the Mayor's doing elsewhere, because the public don't actually sit there and say, Met over here, TFL over there. They look at the Oxford Street pedestrianisation, they say there may cause more crime and antisocial. Some people perceive may cause more, and therefore you would go back to my last point. So that's one of the rumours swirling around Westminster at the moment.
I think that's always a concern when there's changes to, you know, large places like Oxford Street or any bit of the public realm or squares or new developments. You'll know that new developments will go through a planning process, as has Oxford Street, very much to make sure that as far as possible it is designing out crime, and also as far as possible you're designing in protective measures around terrorism. So that Oxford Street is, I know there probably are some concerns around that, but that is very much part of the design process that has taken place to ensure that that happens.
Thank you. I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, this is we've already touched upon therefore items about engagement and confidence. But before I began doing my point, we mentioned safe enabled boards, and I think you may be missing a trick if you don't get them as advocates and partners engaging in this particular process. So just a tip there, Andrew.
Yeah, well, some issues I was going to raise have already been asked, and I think that's a good point as well. Certainly, there is considerable scepticism still. I can't speak for Islington, but certainly in Camden, over the whole merger process, which I assume you've picked up, and that's compounded also by the churn in the BCU commander, which is unfortunate. But anyway, people go for promotion. So you know, the question is, what lessons have been learned, and how are you going to try and sell the new programme to the public in the new BCUs? I mean, what's happened in Camden's happened, you know, and I don't think it's going to be a real job to try and restore that confidence. But how are we going to try and address that in the new BCUs? We had a meeting of our Safe Neighbourhood Board in Barnet the other day, and the Borough Commander came along and explained what was going on. But you know, there's rather more to it than that, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the question I've been asked by Tony, isn't it, around that, around making sure that we are able to communicate what is happening and what may be different and what might not be different. My opinion is that actually I would hope that the public, what they do notice is an improvement in service, an improvement in the safeguarding service, a better response and a better investigation, and especially for victims actually, because part of the changes around the around this in terms of response and owning the investigations. Certain investigations should actually improve the service for victims, because it means they're not being responded to by the response officer and handed off and having a number of different officers. But I take your point entirely, and we will be making sure that we do engage with the Safer Neighbourhood Boards. I don't know whether it's a little bit too optimistic to think they'll become advocates for this change, because nobody likes the change. You know.
Well, I think that's extremely optimistic.
No, that's what I'm saying.
You know, particularly seeing because they do talk to each other, and you know it does. Those meetings they have together. But how are you going to do it? I mean, the aspirations there, I can accept. We've got the aspiration there to try and do it better and learn the lessons from what went wrong in Camden and Islington. But how are you going to do it?
I would expect the leadership that is going into the new borough command units to be engaging with the Safer Neighbourhood Boards. I certainly engage with the Safer Neighbourhood Boards.
I mean, it's going beyond Safer Neighbourhood Boards, because you know, I mean, there's always the question about the extent to which Safer Neighbourhood Boards are representative anyway. So how are you going to get beyond the Safer Neighbourhood Boards into the community as a whole? That's the real question.
There are structures, and we work through our structures, and in terms of the communications, and that is what the Safe Neighbourhood Boards are one of the structures. The ward panels are another structure. We will have to look about whether we need to do other things in order to explain changes that are happening on the ground. It is a different type of change. It is a structural change, a structural reorganisation. It shouldn't affect the actual day-to-day service of the response teams that the public will be expecting. I think that most of the public will be interested and want to know, and we should be communicating, but we need to look at what needs to be done. And we will be talking and engaging with Safer Neighbourhood Boards. I'm sure the Met will be, through their ward panel process, also engaging with the ward panels.
I think in your question you highlight there's no one model. You've got to, you know, so if you look at the new BCU team that go in the borough, they're talking to a range of people, from people in local authorities, Safer Neighbourhoods Boards, wards panels, as we've heard, retailers. You know, in some of these BCUs, you've got huge retail footprints, chambers of commerce. There's a whole range of people that we engage with, have spoken to, and the local media. So they're talking in the local media about what they're doing. There's a Twitter feed. There's a whole range of things to try and get that information. But I think to pretend that everyone will know or want to engage with it, you know, I live in a London borough. How is the health service constructed in my area? I don't really know. I know how to access it if I want to, but I do not know where it's constructed or managed from. But that doesn't affect what I think about that service. Okay, so as part of the rollout process, there will be a public engagement strategy for each BCU? I think we've got to be careful around the language there. There'll be conversations, there'll be explanation around it. You know, as the Deputy Mayor said, in some it will be more than that when there's some ability to shape some of the things. It won't be in every one. So it's not going to be a bespoke, here's the public engagement strategy, or if it is, you'll get fairly standard ones. Right, so you've said that your ambition is for services to improve. What happens if they don't? That's when we do the intervention through the performance management to raise services, to try and understand why they don't. So if you had Martin Hewitt here, Crime Fighters every month looks at the performance across a range of areas, usually themed, and there's some common themes every month, and we look at outliers. So we look at, are the lessons to learn why that particular area is doing so well, but we also look at why is that performance down. So that's a conversation to start with. It's then with things like some of the central resource. Have they got enough central resource to assist if there is a real problem? That is perfectly normal performance conversation. That took place in a 32 borough model. It will take place in a 12 BCU model. And IADS calls, are you promising us that they will not get any worse as a result of this? Well, actually, in these two boroughs, they've got better. Which two boroughs? So Central North at the moment. It depends when you measure it from. It's more or less where it was. No, it's not. I think it is. Anyway. No, it's not. Let's be really clear.
Try not to fall out, gentlemen.
Right, okay.
Well, the fact that
it's the highest it's been in the last 2 years. Right. Well, we'll look at the figures. Look at this. We're not the figures now. And I haven't just picked a particular day. But let's go back to the original question. Are you guaranteeing that IADS calls will not deteriorate for for example, the North West Frontier?
I can't always guarantee you that. What I can say is we've got a performance target for INS calls and we try and meet it. And in exactly the same way, I didn't look at the shift last night, but with everything they had going on that we talked about at the start, I suspect there was some strain on response calls. That would not be picked up as a force-wide performance issue. That's the reality of running an organisation as complex as the Metropolitan Police.
Well, over 10 years, I've never managed to get a senior officer to guarantee on
No, yeah.
and I think that's... Now, we've got the last couple of questions, which will be... that's another thing altogether. We've got a couple of questions on safeguarding and leadership. But Unimesh, did you signal?
I just want to say, Chair, and put on record that the leaders of the two boroughs, we've got 3 borough merger in this project, and certainly the leaders of Redbridge and Barking Dagenham still have considerable reservations. Sophie is well aware of how this rollout is going to work. And I think I'm right in saying that the leader of Havering Council has the same reservations. So I echo everything that has been said by Assemblyman Devonish and by my colleague Andrew. And you were, Sophie, at the meeting on Monday, which was attended by about 100 people in Barking. We were in the same room, and you saw for yourself that there's a considerable selling job to do here in terms of convincing the public out there as to the benefits of this merger. And you heard for yourself the very many serious concerns about a basic policing service, which I think some speakers felt would get worse by this proposed, by the merger that's already taken place.
So yes, I mean, in terms of the leaders of boroughs and leaders of all boroughs, as I've said already, I think everybody has reservations and everyone is concerned. This is considerable change, and I completely understand the reservations around that. Yeah, I was at the public meeting in Barking on Monday evening. Triborough was raised, and in particular around the response times, I would raise it if I was a resident there. I would have raised it with myself and the Member of Parliament there. That was raised, but do you know the biggest issue that they were raising was around burglary and around crime. Now that isn't dependent, and that really isn't around the basic command unit and the Pathfinder, because that had started to shift before the Pathfinder and is changing across London. So actually the focus of that meeting really was around people's very, very real concerns around what is happening, and there has been an increase in burglary.
I suppose not to be left out of this special pleading, my other borough Sutton aren't very happy either. So, right, so who did I see? I saw Len, I think.
Okay, can we go back to abstractions now? Of course, it was an exceptional year, lessons learned on pathfinding. What's the future way of abstractions? Is it more of what we've had in the past, or is it a different way of working? So we're going to require the BCU, or we're going to require individual boroughs? Because I'm still not clear, depending on who I speak to in the police service, whether BCU management issue and whether, don't worry Len, it's all going to be borough policing, whatever that means, or the future of. So what is the requirement of abstractions under the new regime? What are we expecting? You've mentioned earlier on when we raised it, I think the Pathfinders usefully found out the difficulties of exposing for the first time, I think, in the reality for people like you at the centre to understand what the impact is on the borough of abstractions. Okay, it was an exceptional year. We hope it was. We hope we don't have many more like it. So what's the new way of thinking?
So to answer that question, we've got to first of all talk about what we mean by abstraction. So an abstraction of one officer to support an operation going on at a very local level, that thing happens all the time. We'd expect that. We'd see the central requests for abstraction are managed through one of our central teams, and we monitor that through our performance group in terms of what are the calls going out from the centre, the demand for a march, football across London. We can monitor and we track all of that. And we track now, as you know, DWO abstraction, dedicated ward officer abstraction, so we can see all of that data. What's less clear without doing individual explorations on what's called CARMS, which is the duty management system, is within the BCU, the abstractions that go on where someone comes off A shift, goes on to B shift, that sort of thing. So we can see all of that data now in terms of what we've got. We've reduced some of the central abstractions. So we've been really, really tough the Commissioner and the last Commissioner were really tough in sort of saying, look, we have to reduce some of these central abstractions. You know, it's always a tension here. I'm sure it's a tension when you're on the authority. It is still a tension on those calls for central London aid and those sort of things. So we reduce some of those, and we can now see and view all those. Where the abstractions come from, so really technical answer, they come from the centre, they go to the duty hub on the BCU, and the BCU will make a call as to where they take those from. In the first instance, they'll probably come from the response team blocks in the first instance, but they may have other resources available in their model that they want to abstract them from. And of course, sorry, it's an overly long answer, I apologise, but the other thing that, of course, that affects abstractions is where the skills are.
Okay. Because we just want to see, because there's clearly things that are impacting, and we want to see where in the round they are, and we want to see those abstractions being dealt with consistency, because there are problems, and so much for our dedicated ward officers who get taken off to do response. Is that overtime, or is in that those issues, are they what we need to understand in the future is, are they the minimum, or are they really the likely, they shouldn't be moved at all? We know that, but we've still got to provide a service.
So I think it comes down to Mr Dismall's question as well, and the answer there. I think probably if you looked last night in those sorts of scenarios, then absolutely the duty officer, I would expect, is moving people around and do it. That is perfectly normal. That's what policing's about. But to give you reassurance, the norm should not be, response, we're always just going to run it 3 short, so we'll take the 3 quiet wards. That is not what we're saying at all. And this data does allow some visibility to ask those questions.
Now, what's becoming very apparent for the new regime, new ways of working, is the training, both at specialist level, so we might get onto that later on, but the specialist level, but also for those other officers. So what's the new way of working on that, and balancing the time between maintaining the service and making sure they're adequately briefed? I mean, there is a particular issue, which my colleague's going to ask about safeguarding later on, but so what is, I get the feeling that it's important training, and we've talked about it a number of times. So what's the new way of dealing with then? Well, or is there no new way, and we're always going to be under pressure, because that's going to affect performance, isn't it?
Well, it'll affect performance in a number of ways. It'll affect abstraction levels, and this is why, and it might be worth at one of your future sessions, we talk you through some of those assumptions that are built into our modelling around duties management. So you can actually have an abstraction level, so you know, I'll make it up, I can't go above 3 people abstracted from this shift for training, other commitments, otherwise that shift will not survive in terms of its minimum staffing levels. And we monitor that on a daily basis. I've talked about the spreadsheets. One of the spreadsheets I can look at is where we don't meet minimum staffing levels. So on training, we're absolutely clear in terms of the training. So there's an element around the My Investigation and the move to investigation. And we've talked about with those BCUs that are starting in the next wave, how we started to roll out that training early in terms of that training and delivery. And that is a mixture of, as you'd expect, what I call computer-based training, CBT, which of course with the things of the rollout of tablets and some other things can be done in a far more flexible way. And with some of the training, it is face-to-face training.
In that sort of, managers got to make decisions now, because they really were struggling to do the training under the Pathfinders. But my investigations bit, which I presume is about response officers.
Response officers carrying a case.
That was undertaken long before the BCUs. You were moving towards case carrying. Yeah. So so it's not the BCU merger that's creating the pressures. It's the actual delivering the service wherever it is. But we've still got some fundamental problems. Is there any way we're going to... I mean, I hear what you're saying, but is there any way we're going to deal with that, or is it always going to be the problem?
No, so my investigation, and I'll probably unusually draw on previous experience elsewhere. As you move from an organisation that you don't investigate crime with your frontline officers to one that does, that's a huge training commitment and a very, very big cultural change. And the benefits are 2 to 5 years down the line. Huge, huge benefits in terms of having a culture in an organisation where everybody, as part of their core role, can investigate crime to a certain level is absolutely a fundamental way we work in the future. So all that investment, you're absolutely right, we've been doing it for about, in some boroughs, for well over 12 months now, around my investigation, also being referred to as professionalising investigation programme. That is absolutely about rolling that out across the organisation.
Okay, all right. We might want to come back to training and those issues, because it does seem to me that it's going to be key for these reforms. But I mean, I know what you said about 5 years to be fully effective or whatever, but you're meant to reassure me. No, I know, and I am reassured in some ways about what you're doing, but it just seems to me again that unless you have leaders who are prepared to either take risk and make that happen, unless you've got the foot on the back of their neck, it isn't going to happen, because actually I'm risk averse and I want to manage my service, and I ain't going to give the proper leadership or create the space for that training to happen. So we're asking a lot of our managers, and I realise that.
Absolutely. So,
but you know, what I want to understand is what's the senior direction, because I think it is only direction, in that flexible approach of BCU. You're a manager, get on with it, and I'm going to demand better performance out of you. There can't be any flexibility about the training issue. It's a must-do.
Trainings are a must-do, and people, and I think in the way we phrase the question, we're assuming if you're a senior leader on a borough, you are really concerned about making sure you get your people trained so they can deliver an effective performance. They know that. That's what they want.
I am worried that in this brave new world, I will say yes to that, because I think most decent managers would. But actually, in providing the service, they're not going to do it unless there is some initiative from the centre that says you are doing it and you'll be monitored on it.
So we track that. So we track it with all the core and mandatory training. So we can tell you who's not on core. That's all there and is available. There is a huge amount of management information available across the organisation to look at.
Last question, Chair. Right, tenure.
Yes.
Right, we heard unfortunately about what happens when people get promoted. Maybe they shouldn't have been the BCU commander if they were going to do that. We should have stepped them aside. In terms of confidence, in terms of partnership working, everything tells you in your document it's a major challenge. We heard earlier from the Deputy Mayor that we can, it can't, in some of the crime problem solving we face, we need multi-agency approaches. That means that I need to know the person I'm working with, that I have trust and confidence in them, and they know what I'm about and all the rest of it. If they keep moving, or if they're away for a good part of their tenure at a senior level, those relationships can't be established. Even more so under this model. So both the Chief Super and now the Superintendents, what is the tenure issue? What are we aiming for? Where is it? And what's going to be in stone and not moved? Because unless you can't, maybe we won't get a commitment on that. But go on, I'll let you start.
You know the challenge, and we've rehearsed this a number of times before around the fact that individuals will have career aspirations and want to move. And I just put to you, so I do an awful lot of work with London Chief Exec. I think London Chief Execs average tenure about 2 years, 2.2.
More than that.
No. You talk to London Chief Execs. They'll talk about the challenges around tenure and turnover in all sectors. So I think we've got to have some context. I know you don't agree with that, but it's worth having a chat.
I just know some of those execs, and I know the tenure that they've been there.
Yeah, I know some of them who
Can we just move this on beyond the discussion about chief execs?
So, absolutely clear, we want to get 2 to 3 years out of BCU commanders, and we've done selection processes to try and achieve that. We do know, though, and we've talked about this not just at BCU commander level, when we come on to chief officer level as well. You all have seen some of the work HMIC and others have done recently about the flow through of people into senior leadership positions and the need for the service to develop leaders faster and quicker. So there's both national work and local work going on in relation to that.
But also, in terms of that response, it's great, Craig, all right, we can have a debate about the length of time, but then shouldn't we be then looking at going down further into the organisation, encouraging the people at more middle ranking to meet with each other, to work with each other, rather than the chosen few at the top.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if that's the way it's working, this is not going to work.
No,
this is not going to work.
So, Chief Superintendent's process just been done again recently. A group coming through of successful, capable individuals who are going to be really, really good leaders for the future. Superintendents coming behind them. This is part of the workforce planning about how do we keep bringing people through. More than happy to. There's quite a lot of detail on that.
Sorry, sir, I've taken a discussion with my poorly deputy chair. Right, I'd like to open it up to Susan.
Safeguarding.
No, Susan signalled on the same subject,
right, okay.
and then
Yeah,
we've got safeguarding. She's been waiting particularly patiently.
No, that's fine.
It'll be very quick. I understand that rape investigations are going from the central unit down to the BCUs, beg your pardon. How will you ensure that the resourcing issues will be covered? Because clearly if you've got one big team and somebody's away or somebody leaves, it's easier to cover for. But in separate units, it's going to be that much more difficult. So how will you make sure that there is enough resource to cover these situations?
Well, I think that's absolutely right. I think this was one of the challenges why we couldn't do this change under a 32 model, i.e. you couldn't make them resilient enough. If you separated out the central resource and moved it to local, cutting it 32 times, you absolutely tripped over that problem all the time in terms of resilience. It is still a challenge, resilience. It was a challenge when it's a central model. It's a challenge when it's a local model. We hope by bringing together the investigation of domestic abuse, child abuse and sexual offences into one place, we can increase some of the flexibility and volume we've got there. The other thing it does, by having a lead, so in each of the 12 BCUs we know we've got to have one of the detective superintendents who leads on this, it gives the ability across the 12 of those leads to work in a way that they can support each other. But it will all, at the moment, that particular area of investigation is under an awful lot of strain. I mean, we touched on it at the start. Some of the issues around disclosure, some of the views around that there is an awful lot of strain in that area of service. We're absolutely alive to that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Carnival.
I mean, it's just follow on really, because we were discussing before, a number of us, how we were there when there were all these issues in the boroughs and all these teams were centralised because there wasn't a consistency. So now we're suddenly devolving everything again, and it's going to be, Rosie, quite frankly, does worry some of us because we've been there on the reverse discussions.
Yeah. But some of the people who've been working on this, so particular tribute to people like Mark Simmons, who's been working on this this programme for some considerable time. He's lived through all of those changes, both central, local. So, and it goes back to the point in relation to the question earlier. It's very hard to get that resilience at 32. You have a fighting chance of doing it at 12, and you have the opportunity by having that supervision locally to keep some focus on this area of work.
Well, we will keep an eye on that closely. I want to just pick up safeguarding, because that was one of the big concerns that came out of your review of the two pilots. And it does talk about the suitably trained officers, effective shift patterns, so you can work on this. And I had some direct feedback from a councillor in Redbridge who said child protection workers suffered because nobody in the Met talked to the people who are already doing the work on the ground. And you've got to talk to the specialist people on the ground before you go ahead with these mergers if you're going to make this work. Given the situation the Met's in with children and safeguarding and the HMI work that's going on at the moment, what plans have you got to ensure officers have the skills needed and that you can absolutely deliver proper child safeguarding and vulnerable people safeguarding on the ground in these new structures?
So I think that the point about nobody's spoken to people doing it, I absolutely know where people will come from on that. There has been a lot of conversations with people, and if I look at the ones that are currently working towards their readiness to go live, I've looked at a forum group at the moment that is around people in the safeguarding strand talking to each other about just the, where is the safeguarding hub going to be in our new BCU model? Where is this going to be? How will this work? what have we learned from the shift pattern challenges that they had in the East. So that information is coming through. So,
across organisation, not just internally in the Met, but with all the partners
yes,
on the ground.
Yes, but of course, but that's a really important point. The link, the other thing to remember, there is no consistency in the 33 outside of the Met. So one of the challenges you face is some of the, absolutely, some will pick that up and run with it. You'll go to a new BCU setup where 2 local authorities absolutely up for it, one does it quite differently. That's a challenge we face already, so that's absolutely there. In terms of the training and what we do around it, so there's been developed a 1-week safeguarding induction course for all staff within the safeguarding business strand. There's a 5-day mental health training for those doing the mental health problem solving team. There's a Sapphire Kate CSU course that's rolling out and ready for delivery in April and May. That's for detectives and TDCs in that strand. So they're in place and ready to go.
And is all of this being picked up through the safeguarding committee that the Deputy Mayor chairs to make sure that we don't see a further drop-off in this really important area?
It's absolutely going to Martin as the lead in that area, which means it will be reported and visible to the Deputy Mayor.
So is this something, Deputy Mayor, you're keeping an eye on through that working group that you chair?
Yes, through the oversight board that I have on child protection, absolutely,
Yes.
and the other questions that have been asked. HMIC come to that working group, and they're the questions that I asked them around the Pathfinders and around what they are seeing. Absolutely, that is picked up, not just there, but also in the other oversight boards as well around safeguarding.
I just think it's such a vulnerable area that a big change like this, you know, that things fall between.
But I think also it's some of those things about giving us, you know, we've talked before about that phrase that people talk about, the single front door, the single way to access this service. There are some really good things in this change. Get them right. There should be some prizes for victims in this.
Okay, thank you, I think.
Okay, thank you. No further questions. I think it was right that we spent considerable time on that topic. It's such a radical change in policing. Clearly, a lot of the subjects that we raised, we'll continue to raise and watch over the next 18 months as that flows on, and we will revisit accordingly. So, moving on to, if I may, the next set of subjects, which we may be able to move forward slightly more apace. The next is disclosures around the issue of the high-profile cases that were dropped at trial, and also the work that the Met is launching as a result with a review of its existing cases. I think, Andrew, you want to lead on
that. Yeah, well, can I start off? I mean, the review of Alan was quite important. It came up with 9 recommendations. I wondered how far you've got with implementing them.
So in terms of the progress against Alan, so most of the progress and recommendations against Alan have been aligned with the National Delivery Plan. You'll know that as a result of not just the Alan case, but a number of cases across the criminal justice process system, there are a whole range of issues that have been picked up to address around disclosure. There is due to be published, hopefully later on this month, both CPS and police action plan for disclosure across London.
Yeah, well, that was supposed to be developed by February, so...
Yes, end of February.
End of February.
Yeah, we're virtually there. Yeah, in fairness...
Shall we try recommendation 2, which is to be agreed by March?
No, well, end of February. I think we're on for the end of February. In fact, I know there's a meeting on Friday.
Right, that's recommendation 1. Recommendation 2, which the nationally agreed joint CPS protocol, was to be agreed by March.
Yes.
Has that been done?
So that work is underway at the moment in terms of it. That's obviously something that's being led because there's MPCC in this space as well, because it's all of policing. So that work's being led by our colleague from Surrey, ready to go.
Okay, disclosure training?
Disclosure training, that's part of this action plan in terms of when we're doing it. It hasn't started in terms of all the training yet, but the action plan's there. And the plan is going to cover a number of areas, which it might just assist if I gave you a feel for what it's going to cover in terms of where we are. It's going to cover capacity, so that's particularly the issue about digital, and if you're interested I can absolutely explain a bit more around that. It's going to cover capability, so that's both capability on disclosure, so the training and where we go. It's going to cover the role of leadership, so where does leaders work in this? Goes back to some of the points made earlier. How the partnership works. So how does the partnership, how do you get failings in a system where a lot of people are doing oversight of it and we don't all pick those up? So how does that work? And then the other one is governance. So those are the areas it's covering.
Okay.
Sorry, go on.
Well, I'm not going through all the 9 recommendations because we're quite tight on time, but I see you've appointed a new assistant commissioner.
Yes.
Is that an additional post or?
Yes.
And then, so we are an additional assistant commissioner, whose sole job is going to be this, or doing other stuff as well.
Well, there will be absolutely be other things as well, but the focus when Steve joins us in March is around driving this piece of work. This is a major piece of work we've got to drive.
Obviously, it is. Yeah.
And also, and I think the important thing, it doesn't lend itself to just sitting it in one place, because it goes right across the business and right across the criminal justice process.
The CPS as well, but you've not done us.
Yeah, well, that's what, yeah.
How far have you got with reviewing the 600 active cases?
So there's the review in terms of the 600 has resulted in a number of detailed requests coming back. That has been complete, i.e. the review has been completed.
Of the full 600?
The 600 have been reviewed and done. That's, in terms of what's come back, are a number of detailed requests about both further lines of inquiry and further lines of disclosure.
Are we likely to see some more of those dropped?
I don't have that level of detail, and clearly that's ultimately a decision for the prosecutor and may depend what comes from these individual requests.
When will we know that?
I haven't got that detail.
Or rather, more importantly, when will the people who've been charged know that, well, if they've been charged wrongly?
Well, clearly they'll be done as expeditiously as possible in terms of that, but I can't give you individual timing on every one of the 600 cases.
Okay, well, perhaps you could keep us informed about where you get to that, because presumably if people have been wrongly charged, we need to get them out of the system as quickly as possible, because not just for their point of view, which obviously they need to know, but also to stop wasting resources on them.
Absolutely, but to be clear as well, these are cases in various stages in the process.
Yeah.
So they won't all be charged.
Well, fine. Okay. Next question. Obviously, you've been focusing on the rape and serious assault cases. Are you looking, or will this disclosure review, for want of a better word, be looking at other types of case, for example, fraud, where there's an awful lot of digital material as well?
Yes.
Okay.
And there are, and that's an important point, there are bits of learning from other types of investigation, of which fraud is one, counter-terrorism is one. But as I say, you know, the digital material is a complete whole strand by itself in terms of what we all need to do, understand the limitations or otherwise of that.
Last question, really. You've seconded 120 officers from across the Met to do this work, I believe.
Yes.
Where have they come from?
So we took territorial policing, provided 60 detectives and 60 police constables from response teams, CIDs and neighbourhoods to support the CASO review during February and March, and they should go back by not later than the end of March.
So they're all come from the BCUs?
Yes.
Okay.
Happy? Right, thank you. Well, again, it's another item that we will revisit.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously we're short of time.
Yeah, no, I take the point, but the question has been posed and answered. We'll pursue them at more depth later. Okay, moving on, if I may. We thought it timely to ask some questions around violence against women and girls, particularly around the increase in rape figures and also about the emerging, shall we say, strategy. And I think we've got one or two questions around that. Susan, you're going to lead on that?
Yes, thank you. There is a worrying increase. It's nearly 20% in the year to January compared to the previous year. Have we any idea, Deputy Commissioner, why this is?
No, is the honest answer. There are a number of theories in terms of the reporting around it, and we've had a number of debates at Oversight Board and elsewhere. it's simply not as simple as saying this is increased confidence. Of course that plays a part in increased confidence and if you like faith in the process, but there is something going on with sexual offending in London that we don't fully understand, i.e. the causes of it. We see the end of it, we don't understand the causes.
Okay. Deputy Mayor, the Police and Crime Plan states that specific work will be commissioned to look beneath the reported crime stats. Has that work started and what does that involve?
That work hasn't started yet. It's being put together at the moment in terms of the research programme for this year and should take, I hope, will be finished by the end of this year to do exactly as Craig has talked about, to get underneath the figures, because I always worry that we hope, well, you like to think that women are much more confident to come forward. However, what I'm also concerned about is that actually underlying that there may be an increase in actual sexual violence, in rape and offending, and that's the thing we need to get to the bottom of. At the moment, the Evidence and Insight team are working up how to, it's very, very, I've had discussions with them about it. It's a complicated matter and they're working up how to undertake this research, and then we'll get going this year.
Get going this year?
I'm hoping it'll be ended. I mean, it depends on, once they can scope it, exactly how, you need to be able to understand. It's a complicated matter. I hope that we'll get the results by the end of the year, but I can't promise that.
Oh, that is disappointing because it is such a high increase. Deputy Commissioner, what progress has been made in enhancing the first response training for officers?
Well, we've done some work in terms of that. So all frontline officers working in borough policing now get additional specialist training in domestic abuse, considering some of the new legislation. So things like Clare's laws, protection orders, those sorts of things, and victim care and how to target offenders. So that work has started.
How is this being reflected in the victims' satisfaction? If they,
I've not seen it directly in victim satisfaction, but I have seen some of it flow through in terms of some of the performance figures around DA and domestic abuse.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor, the Mayor committed to refresh the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, which was expected in November. When will strategy be published and what's caused the delay? Because I'm sure I've asked about this before and he said it would be very, very soon the last time I asked, which was last year.
We're hoping to have published it before the end of November, but we have delayed it in order to, because there's been such a lot of, around disclosure, around sexual harassment. We've delayed it slightly in order to make sure that it's properly taking into account those issues, and we hope to publish it before mid-March.
Definitely.
I hope so.
I'm saying that because he definitely seemed to think it was coming out in November.
It was due to come out in November, absolutely, as I've said to this committee before.
Okay, and will there be some measurables in it? Because the one thing that is lacking in every strategy that seems to be coming out is any measurable anywhere. It's like wish lists, quite frankly, most of what's coming out. And this is such a difficult subject, but such an important subject. We really do need to be able to measure, and if not, make sure that resource goes into any area that is needed to deal with this, because figures are really going the wrong direction.
Will we be measuring performance? Absolutely, and as with the Police and Crime Plan, we do have measurables and a performance framework around that. They're not the same as the MOPAC 7, they're not targets plucked out of the air, and I make no excuses or no apologies for that, because we have seen that putting those types of targets into place can create perverse behaviours, can mean that you work to the target rather than work to really what's in front of you. HMIC report on child protection that we've discussed today was very clear that the MOPAC 7 meant that there was not enough focus on harm and vulnerability on child protection within the Metropolitan Police Service, whilst that target regime was there. We do have measurables. We look at repeat victimisation, repeat offending, and we also look at wanting to see year-on-year reductions in crime. I believe that's a much, much better way forward than plucking targets out of the air.
At least the MOPAC 7 did actually focus people's minds, so I totally disagree with that comment.
You can take that up with HMIC.
Whatever, we can debate that another time, I'm sure. Both of you, what progress has been made in taking forward the other commitments on the VAWG made in the Police and Crime Plan while we await the refreshed strategy, in particular prioritising the issue of repeat victimisation?
There were a number of commitments in the police and crime plan. I think actually in terms of violence against women and girls, it was about 40 commitments. So in terms of working through that, we have been commissioning services around violence against women and girls and victim services. We have made sure that there are a number of independent sexual violence advocates is maintained, as well as the independent domestic violence advocates. So there has been progress on the commitments, but those commitments will be part of the violence against women and girls strategy as well.
Okay, perhaps you could send us a list of where we are on those.
Yeah, absolutely, sure.
I'm sure the rest of the committee would like to see where we are with those. Thank you.
I would say this, wouldn't I? But for the sake of balance, the MOPAC 7 wasn't perfect, and that's accepted. It did see a reduction in neighbourhood crimes, and we have seen a lack of targets in many of the Mayor's crime reduction documents that I hope you'll reflect upon and improve upon. So, Joanne, I just wanted to comment on that before I brought you in, Joanne.
This. The targets that everybody, is looking at a much more sophisticated performance framework that actually measures outcomes that matter, and outcomes, and absolutely in terms of volume crime, it matters. But having those targets like that creates perverse behaviour and does not mean that you're looking across the piece in terms of what really matters.
As long as in 2 years' time we're all able to judge yourself and Craig and others on figures over that period, I'm happy. Now, Joanne.
You can judge them every quarter in the performance quarterly report that we provide for you.
Yeah, and of course it was Theresa May that said the police shouldn't have targets. I remember her say that quite clearly when we were Home Secretary. But Craig, can I just say thank you? I think that's the first time a senior officer's come to this committee and actually accepted that increase in sexual violence may not be just about increase in reporting and confidence in reporting, and do it in that way. So I think that's really useful, and I'm looking forward to the research. I think that's it's something that I've been asking for a number of years for this committee. But can I ask you, and perhaps not now, but to send to the chair, on the victim satisfaction, I think last time I asked the question, you said you were looking at the processes again, and obviously I think satisfaction surveys are sent out predominantly to women, but also to men, often after the case has travelled through any process. And could you just perhaps write to the chair and explain how we measure victim satisfaction in these cases and what the results have been?
You can do that, and also you may wish to discuss that with Claire Waxman, the Victims Commissioner, who is doing a lot of work around victim satisfaction on this, and not just around the surveys, but with the Metropolitan Police, some really important deep dives and talking to victims around what it is that they need to be looking at, and what is perhaps not, why they aren't as satisfied as they should be, and what has been going wrong in that.
Happy with that? Okay, we'll revisit that. Right, we're on the final furlong. Andrew, you want to be elsewhere? Sorry to see you go. Carnival, if we may. We've got a couple of questions around that. Now, a year ago, the report was published by this committee reflecting on the previous Carnival, with some issues around high levels of crime, high levels of lack of safety. I remember Commander Musker being very candid in his comments around that. There was some comfort given that the next Carnival, which was last August, would be different around issues of responsibility. I think it was the shortness of time. At that time, the recommendations couldn't all be committed to last August, but what we're interested now, with it only 6 months away, is where will Carnival take us? So I think, Tony, particularly, you have an interest in your constituency. Did you want to lead the questions?
Thank you, Chair. I should also declare, as A.M. Dismore did, that I don't live in Notting Hill, but I live on the edge of the Carnival in the Hyde Park ward in the city of Westminster. So I know the issues even before I became a councillor and assembly member. Deputy Mayor, during our investigation into Carnival, most people, including the Carnival Trust, agreed that change was needed to make the Carnival safer. What progress have you and your partners made since then, please, and what changes can we expect at the August 2018 Carnival?
So Notting Hill Carnival is not the responsibility of one sole organisation, as you very well know. There's a number of different organisations that are involved in it. So in terms of, what changes do I expect to be made, it's the Strategic Partnership Group and those with the responsibility, specifically Kensington and Chelsea, Westminster, the police in terms of security and safety of the crowds and security and safety of the people that have visited. I just want to make that clear because it isn't the sole responsibility of one organisation. Sure. And then you have the Carnival organisers as well. And that Strategic Partnership Group met regularly in the run-up to the 2017 Carnival and has met regularly since then. In the run-up to the 2017 Carnival, as MOPAC did actually enable the Trust Commission and was commissioned a crowd dynamic, a survey of the crowds to look at particular issues around crowding, because the then Commissioner after the 2016 Carnival was very, very clear that he felt that the crowding was absolutely at unsafe levels, and we took that very seriously and commissioned, and that survey was commissioned. There were a number of changes in 2017 which did to some extent deal with the crowding in terms of reducing the number of sound systems, smaller number of floats, and some changes around some of the stations. Now, we've commissioned, there's another piece of work going on with crowd dynamics around is there anything else that needs to happen around crowding, and we're expecting some results around that soon. But in terms of the Strategic Partnership Group, it is very much working together with sitting around that is the Metropolitan Police and the other organisations to ensure that anything that needs the learnings from the last Carnival are implemented, and there is a proper stewarding plan and a proper plan around management of the Carnival.
Okay, you didn't really say anything specifically, and I don't really expect you to perhaps in a public meeting, but could you certainly near the date let myself and the boroughs know if there's anything specifically that will be different this August than last year?
I think absolutely. I think it would be good to brief the committee as a whole in terms of in the run up to the Carnival as to what's different. Obviously, some of that will depend on the threat and the security level, because some of the things that were changed in terms of security for the Carnival changes depending on what the threat and the intelligence is. But in terms of what else might be different in terms of the Carnival, we'll absolutely be able to brief you about that nearer the time.
You've always had, to the credit of the MOPAC, we've had very good briefings nearby to the event and also invited to control rooms, etc., that many members have taken up those invitations, Tony. Sorry to interrupt.
One of the things that is being looked at in particular around the crowd dynamics is around the actual route, the Carnival route, and looking at the data that they have collected, because they were there during the weekend and that was part of the work. They're looking at the judging zone. I don't know what the recommendations are going to be, and they have to be accepted and then delivered. So I do think that's a case of nearer the time. Absolutely, we should brief you about what's happening.
Thank you. And in terms of as you quite rightly said, you're reading my questions to me almost, the wider Carnival family are being given the opportunity to, quote, express an interest and take responsibility for planning, unquote, for the Carnival this year. What does this mean in practice?
Kensington, you'll know that Kensington and Chelsea have put out, I don't know what the right phrase is, a call for bids, or I don't think it is procurement, a call for bids for the grant that they give to Carnival organisers. That is a matter, that's Kensington and Chelsea have done that, and I understand that they are going to be taking a decision shortly around that. That is a decision for Kensington and Chelsea.
Okay, I think I'll leave it there. I think
okay.
There's some questions,
did
I
you
believe.
Want to come in?
No, I think it's all been covered, really.
Really? Okay. I mean, I know that we get briefings near the time. There was issues around the high level of crime last August that was serious, and we need to be reassured about that. And again, the issue around as I said earlier, about the overall responsibility is still a bit cloudy. We look forward to more information around that. Len, you want to come in?
By and large, the difficulties in policing on the daytimes is different from night time. It would be really interesting and I know you did a lot of pre-Carnival activity, and I suppose in policing terms, and I think purely just in policing terms around what maybe this committee really ought to focus on is about your nighttime activity. What can be done organisationally or changes to make people safer? And I think there are some issues, much that we're about tackling crime, the policing agency is the only one who can deal with safety of people, and I'm increasingly being worried about when it's dark, stampeding and issues there. There were events last time of where there were a number of false alarms raised and people told to run. And in terms of that crowd behaviour control for the night time, and it might be, Chair, when we have something back before us, that maybe, there are loads of other aspects of Notting Hill Carnival, but the one that probably drives in terms of the crimes that most of us are at night, sexual crimes, violent crimes, the theft crimes, where you get larger numbers of people. So I wonder if that could be somewhere where we could concentrate on what the Met plans to be asking of others, because I presume, or in some cases which we're becoming much clearer on through our scrutiny, what you can demand of others, but sometimes you're reluctant to do so. And we think you should stop being reluctant to do so because the situation demands you to tell them to do it.
Well, I think you saw the movement strategies work last year, and Dave, I think you should come back to that.
Again, it's the issue of the violence, extreme violence and crime, but also against the numbers of the crowds and the safety of those people going peaceably about their way, but danger to life.
And that's what the movement, I always get their name wrong, movement strategies.
Yes, they know about these things.
Absolutely, have taken as part of their work. They are the experts in crowd dynamics, and part of the work is around where there may be flashpoints, where there's crowding, and what happens if there is an issue, and how they can be dispersed. That's absolutely their expertise. That's the recommendations that were put in place last time around All Saints Road and around different sound systems. And it's again the thing that they're looking at again. There was an issue around judging. I think the judging point last time. It is for them to recommend, as experts on crowding, what should be put in place.
Thank you very much. Okay, right. I'd like to thank you both for your very thorough answers this afternoon. I'd like the committee to note the monthly report from MOPAC. I'd like the committee to note the report, any answers given by the Deputy Mayor to questions asked by members today. Caroline, you wanted to come in?
Just on that, given we've had quite a lot of discussions about borough mergers, I wonder whether we might take offline but consider whether we want to do either a letter on it setting out our concerns, but also things that we want to measure to see whether this has been a success or not. I think Len raised some really good points in there about sanction detections and stuff, what we would expect to see. Just a thought from today.
Thank you. We've captured that because so much was raised earlier that is of the time now it's been introduced, but it's going to roll over the period of time. We need to keep track of those issues. So we're making notes around that. And when we have the meeting next week...
which I'm not at, but yes.
You'll feed in anyway.
I've fed in there.
Okay, that's fantastic. Right, sorry, another...
does the committee want to delegate authority to you to agree? Any output?
I'm sure they will. Would you like to delegate? Of course, they're very generous like that. Item 7, can I ask the committee to note our updated work programme, noting the summary of our visit to HMP Downview. Item 8, date to next meeting, Wednesday, 7th of March. I have no other business. Thank you, colleagues.
GLA, Chamber, Sound.